LoveLore Library. Chapter 608. Ning Xuema could see her own reflection in Mr. Han's deep blue eyes. This made her even more flustered. Her heart failed to live up to her expectations and beat even faster. Her face also became hot. No matter how strong she was, no matter how good she was at pretending, she was still a 21 or 22-year-old girl. She seemed to be open and unrestrained, but deep down, she was still conservative. Being suppressed like this, she finally panicked. You. Let go of me first. I'm fine, what's wrong with you? Han Shangyue's eyes were still staring at her, as if he wanted to tear apart her disguise and see her true emotions. And Ning Xuema's reaction made him somewhat satisfied. He stretched out 2 fingers and lightly pinched her face. It's so hot. You should be blushing, right? Blushing, heartbeat, averting your eyes. Xuema, you still like me. Ning Xuema. Her body slightly stiffened. As if there was an electric current on his fingers, it made her heart tremble. However, this position, especially his words, made her feel embarrassed. She tilted her face and avoided his hand. She sneered, I didn't. You really think too much. Stubborn little girl. Han Shangyue's lips curved into a faint smile. You can't hide from me. He actually smiled. The cold and aloof great god actually smiled. His smile was like the spring flowers blooming, and also like thousands of peach blossoms blooming on the branches. Ning Xuema's eyes were almost dazed. She was momentarily lost in thought. She took a deep breath and quickly calmed down some of her chaotic emotions. She raised her head. Great God, you really think too much. Whether it's blushing or heartbeat, which girl would feel this way when being suppressed? In other words, if you were suppressed by other men, your face would also blush, your heart would race, and avert your eyes? The smile on Han Shangyue's face disappeared. Ning Xuema was stunned. Shui Lan's image flashed through her mind. That bastard also took advantage of her a lot. He also used similar methods to suppress her. At that time, she didn't feel blushing, heartbeat, or averted her eyes. It was a deep sense of humiliation, and the biggest thought in her mind was to kill that bastard. Then what she was feeling now was, did she really like him? No, that wasn't it. I don't like him, I just don't hate him. This reaction was probably a normal reaction to being suppressed by a man she didn't dislike. In front of Han Shangyue, she did not want to lose to him in terms of grandeur. Therefore, even though she was confused for a moment, her lips curled into a nonchalant smile. Of course. Any man would be the same. Before she could finish her sentence, she was interrupted by Han Shangyue. I don't believe you. I want to try again. Give it a try. How else should he try? Before Ning Xuema could react, he suddenly pressed his lips against hers. Then, he pressed his lips against hers. Ning Xuema's mind exploded. Her nostrils were filled with the pleasant smell of his body. His lips were soft, and after their lips met, they were unwilling to leave. Was she forcefully kissed? She was forcefully kissed. Ning Xuema subconsciously wanted to push him away. However, her current strength was like a drizzle to him. She was not a threat at all. She couldn't stop him and could only allow his lips to caress her lips as he wished. His lips were warm and soft. In an instant, she felt as if a strong current had passed through her body. Her head was dizzy, her heart was beating like a drum, and her limbs were weak. Chapter 609. However, his lips were still pressed against Xuema's lips, but he didn't make any further moves. Ning Xuema's lips were a little dry, so she couldn't help but stick out her tongue to lick her lips. Naturally, this lick also licked his lips, his body slightly stiffened, and then he caught the tip of her tongue as if he was enlightened. He gently sucked and slowly bit her tongue, and didn't let go. This kind of kiss was undoubtedly torture for Ning Xuemo. The tip of her tongue was sucked and numbed by him. She hurriedly retracted her tongue, but it also brought his tongue into her mouth. Ning Xuemo's mind was blown again, and her heart was so nervous that it almost jumped out of her chest. She wanted to push his tongue away, but she was entangled with him again. What was originally a simple kiss on the lips developed into a French kiss. Ning Xuemo's limbs were weak, and her vision was blurry. In a trance, a few scattered images flashed through her mind, but those images were too fast and too scattered, so she couldn't capture them at all. Her mind seemed to have traversed thousands of mountains and rivers, and then there was a faint and clear laughter, so you don't even know how to kiss. Let me teach you. This voice was so sudden that it made her heart feel like it was hit hard by something. Her nose was inexplicably sour, and her mind was even more confused. She didn't know when her hand was released by him. She didn't know when her arm was hooked around his neck, and her body was completely in his embrace, allowing him to do whatever he wanted. The storm-like kiss finally stopped. His lips slightly left hers, and he whispered in her ear, "You like me." This time, he was very sure. Ning Xuemo stared blankly for a moment. Her muddled mind finally cleared up. Anger suddenly rose in her heart. She opened her mouth to retort, but his fingertips had already brushed against her lips. "Since you already like me, then I have nothing to worry about." Ah. Ning Xuemo originally wanted to tell him that he was thinking too much, and that she didn't like him, but his last sentence attracted her attention. "You. What did you say? What are you worried about?" Before she could finish her sentence, she felt a little dizzy and her vision turned black. Her body went limp and he pulled her back into his arms. Before she fainted, she vaguely heard him say to her, "Xuemo, I will restore your appearance." Rongyue at Tianlan finally finished preparing everything. He was about to send a boy to invite the two people who were strolling outside. Han Shangyue walked in with Ning Xuemo in his arms. Rongyue Tian looked at Ning Xuemo in his arms and then looked at her. "You talked to her? Did you tell her everything?" Han Shanyue's face was expressionless as he said, "I don't like to talk. It's better to do it directly." Rongyu Ishinlin, Di's way of doing things was simple and crude. This is related to this lady's reputation. I feel that she has the right to know and the right to choose. Rong Yuetian felt that it was not appropriate. She's my concubine, so it's natural for her to do these things. She will accept it. Han Shanyue looked at the layout of the secret chamber, and then looked at Rongyu Ishinlin. I feel that you can get lost. Rongyu Ishinlin thought about it and agreed. These two people were originally husband and wife. Although she was his concubine, Di Suo was indeed her husband. It was natural for him to do these things for her, and there was nothing wrong with it. Under Han Shanyue's obvious gaze, Rongyu Ishinlin braced herself and told him some things to take note of. Chapter 610. After Rongyu Tianlan finished speaking and confirmed that there were no mistakes, she left swiftly. She then closed the door for them. Before Ning Xuemo recovered, no one was allowed to disturb the people inside. Her body felt warm, as if there were clouds floating around her. A warm current flowed into her from the tip of her toes and climbed up her legs inch by inch. Wherever it passed, there was a numbness and itchiness, as if her muscles were slowly regenerating and her blood vessels were becoming lively again. This kind of crawling speed felt very slow. It felt painful and comfortable at the same time. The numbness and itchiness became more and more intense, and more parts of her body. Ning Xuemo, who was in a coma, finally regained her consciousness and slowly woke up. Her eyelashes fluttered a few times, and she slowly opened her eyes. After all, she had just woken up from a coma, so her gaze was still a little confused. Then, she slowly woke up. What she saw was a wooden wall and a rippling green pool. a luminous pearl above her head emitted a gentle light, illuminating the surroundings. Where was this? Her mind was still a little confused, and her body moved subconsciously. Suddenly, her waist was tightened. "Don't move." The voice was cold and a little hoarse. Ning Xuema's body stiffened instantly. She slowly lowered her head, and her eyes widened immediately. She was sitting in a strange position in an oversized wooden tub. There was not a single piece of cloth on her body, and she was as smooth as a newborn baby. The jade-green water rippled around her body, and the jade-green water gently swayed around her body, creating ripples. The water was so transparent that she could see every inch of her skin clearly. She could even see the light green blood vessels under her skin. She was bathing. But this was not the most important thing. The most important thing was that she found an arm wrapped around her waist, and a jade-like palm on her calf. She was sitting in someone's arms. And she was sitting naked in someone's arms. Ah! This scene was too exciting. It was too erotic. Ning Xuema gasped and couldn't help but want to jump up. "Don't be afraid." The arm wrapped around her waist tightened again, and a faint light appeared from the arm. Ning Xuema's strength seemed to have been sucked out in an instant, and she couldn't move anymore. "This is the only way to restore your appearance. Don't be afraid, just feel me." The cold voice softly sounded behind her. The hand on her calf moved up a few inches, and the light green light slowly rotated from the palm, causing the surrounding green water to swirl as well. This swirling water swirled around her calf, as if it was massaging her calf, and waves of heat rose from her calf, inch by inch. "Han. Great God, Han." Ning Xuema's voice slightly trembled. "Yes, it's me." The voice behind him was neither fast nor slow, calm and collected. Oh my God, she was actually bathing in the same tub as this almighty God. Ning Xuema felt as if she was struck by lightning, and her body stiffened. Fortunately, she couldn't move right now, or else she would be so nervous that she wouldn't know where to put her hands and feet. She looked down at the arm wrapped around her waist, and the light white sleeves swayed in the water. Very good. It could be seen that he was wearing clothes. It wasn't a pure couple's bath, no. He was indeed wearing a robe, but she was fucking naked. She was at a disadvantage, wasn't she? He had seen her naked, touched her all over, and devoured every bit of her tofu. And he... Chapter 611. Ning Xuema tried her best to widen her eyes, but could only see one of his hands and a small part of his wrist. Also, this posture is too erotic. She felt that even those erotic films would not necessarily have such a nosebleed scene. What kind of method is this to restore one's original appearance? What kind of lousy setting is this? Needless to say, this method to remove the disguise technique was thought of by that guy Rong Juishan. That guy looks so romantic, so serious. Could it be that he wrote something about jade praying mats or jade girls? Rong Juishan, who was leisurely drinking tea under a big tree in the courtyard, suddenly sneezed. He rubbed his nose, opened the fan with the word romantic written on it and waved it. Who scolded him behind his back? Fortunately, it was just a sneeze. For him, it was nothing, so he did not take it to heart. He picked up the cup and took a sip of tea, the corners of his pale red lips slightly hooked up. These were now, very erotic, right? Very exciting, right? Would his frozen heart, which had remained motionless for tens of thousands of years, crack open a tiny crack? Infuse a little bit of the mortal world into it. I didn't think that Diswo would be involved in such matters of love and affection. Love is poison. Once touched, it will hurt, but it can make the person involved willingly drink this honey-flavored arsenic. Someone's shadow seemed to flash in front of his eyes. His mind moved, his breathing stopped, and the familiar pain emerged again. His fingers holding the teacup stiffened, lost in thought for a moment, then smiled gently, took a sip of tea, and pressed that shadow into the depths of his memory, in the secret chamber. In the bathtub. Ning Xuemo could not help but begin to suppress her breathing. She was still sitting cross-legged in his arms with her legs slightly curled up, her palms were forced to close over her heart, a standard meditation posture. His palms moved up her calves inch by inch, and had already moved to her knees. The strange numbness became more and more intense, hot and numb in her bone marrow, as if there was an electric current running up and down her limbs and bones. This feeling was both comfortable and painful. Ning Xuemo had never tasted such a feeling in her life. She bit her lips hard to prevent herself from moaning. It was as if he had been drugged by some legendary drug, but he couldn't get rid of it. There was an indescribable discomfort, and also an indescribable ecstasy. This feeling was too unbearable and made her feel embarrassed. Subconsciously, she wanted to divert her attention. The only thing that made her feel gratified was that wherever his palm pressed, the flabby skin became plump again, and the skin became white and elastic again, returning to the moist skin of a young girl. At this moment, the parts below her knees and above her feet had returned to their original state, but the parts above her knees had yet to recover. Comparing the two parts, she looked a little strange. Naturally, Ning Xuemo also saw her reflection in the water. His face, neck, upper body. They were still so old that she didn't want to take a second look at them. Looking at her wrinkled face, Ning Xuemo finally realized a problem. When Han Shangyue kissed her, she was looking at this old face. How could he do it? God, what kind of taste do you have? With his misophobia, when he kissed her, he must have made a huge decision, right? Just to test whether she liked him or not, he really put in a lot of effort. Chapter 6:12. She wondered how many times Master Han had to wipe his mouth after that, so this was the way to break the disguise, to see and touch her naked. Then he asked her if she liked him. Was it because he wanted to take responsibility for her? In that split second, Ning Xuemo's mind was already in turmoil. She didn't know how many thoughts flashed through her mind. She felt an inexplicable bitterness in her heart. Because her consciousness had been diverted, she finally ignored some of the itchy numbness in her bones. Her heavy breathing gradually returned to normal. Distracted. Suddenly, she heard his low but clear voice from behind her. His palm moved up another inch. Ning Xuemo's body tensed up, his hand. His hand was now close to her inner thigh. The skin in this area was already sensitive. Under the heat of his palm, Ning Xuemo's body tensed up, and a trembling sound came from her throat. Ah! Of course, this trembling sound only came out halfway, and she forcefully swallowed it down. They were not having sex. It was too embarrassing for her to make such a sound. Be natural, don't suppress it. Han Shanyue's voice came from behind her again, that warm breath just beside her ear. Ning Xuemo, damn it, this was a serious time to detoxify the poison. Why did his words sound like what the groom would say during the wedding night? He could be natural, but she could not. That numbing and itchy feeling was overwhelming. Ning Xuemo bit her lips hard to suppress the moan that was about to come out. Be born naturally, be destroyed naturally, act according to your nature. Forcefully suppressing it will not be good for your recovery. Han Shanyue's voice came again, but it still sounded monotonous. Ning Xuemo inwardly clenched her teeth. This bastard really can't sit still. This method made her want to die, but he was so calm, and she could not hear anything out of the ordinary. Such an erotic position, such an erotic her, sitting in his arms without any barrier. He really did not have any feelings. Damn it, he was even worse than Lu Xiaohui. He really did not have any ambiguous feelings towards her, right? Otherwise, he would not be able to do this. Unless he was a natural eunuch. Her thoughts drifted further and further away, and the uncomfortable feeling in her heart grew heavier. I've been staring at your hair the whole time. Han Shangyue, who was behind him, seemed to be able to read his mind. He explained calmly. The method to break this kind of disguise technique was extremely perverse. As a spellcaster, he was not allowed to be emotional. His breath had to be stable, and his output of telekinesis could not be wrong. This required the caster to have a strong mental fortitude and a high enough telekinesis. It can be used freely. On the other hand, the recipient was required to act naturally and not forcefully suppress it. Only by acting naturally could the skin truly recover. Now, Ning Xuemo was probably afraid of embarrassing herself, so she was trying her best to hold it in. It was obviously detrimental to her recovery. Therefore, when Han Shangyue noticed that something was wrong with her, he immediately warned her and did not explain himself. Ning Xuemo glanced sideways at her own white hair. All right, facing this kind of brain, even the most amorous rapist probably wouldn't be interested. Ning Xuemo looked like an open person, but she was still naturally not open to this kind of thing. And because she was a secret agent, she had to endure hunger and thirst, endure all kinds of temptations, and naturally, she had to endure desire. Her tolerance was originally much higher than ordinary people, so her tolerance at this time was also subconscious. Chapter 613. In his life, Han Shangyue had met many bold women who flirted in front of him. There were even some who stripped naked in front of him. Moreover, all of these women were devastatingly beautiful. Among them, there was no lack of beauties who were even more beautiful and enchanting than Ning Xuemo. However, he was able to turn a blind eye to them, and his heart remained calm. Those women's flirting only made him feel disgusted. Under normal circumstances, those women did not have a good ending. Currently, Ning Xuemo's body was still in the state of being half angel and half demon. She really couldn't be considered beautiful. Even her voice sounded a bit old. Logically speaking, her current state shouldn't be able to evoke his state of mind, let alone having that kind of special thoughts. However, reality and dreams were always poles apart. His emotions wavered. The skin under his palm was like jade. That touch seemed to directly moisten the depths of his soul. A warm current rushed to a certain point in his lower abdomen, causing his palm to heat up instantly. Oh! Ning Xuemo, who was under his palm, softly moaned again. She murmured two words, Jiuli. Han Shangyue instantly felt as if he was struck by lightning. His palm trembled and an inexplicable force almost gushed out from his palm. If this palm strike landed directly on her body, she would definitely be severely injured. Fortunately, Han Shangyue woke up in time and used all his strength to retract his palm. At least, it did not hit Ning Xuemo. However, the consequence of forcefully retracting the force was that it hit his own body. This caused the blood in his chest to surge and he almost spat out blood again. Because of the instability of the force in his palm, Ning Xuemo's recovery speed slowed down. It even showed signs of stopping. Damn it! Rongyue Tianlan once said that once this method of removing the disguise started, it had to be persevered until the end. Otherwise, all the previous efforts would be wasted and she would never be able to recover. This girl was so vain. If he let her be half angel and half demon, she would probably be in so much pain that she would want to die. He did not know what kind of trouble she would cause. He took a deep breath and gathered his thoughts. In order to prevent himself from being disturbed by Ning Xuemo's voice, he simply sealed his hearing. If possible, he also wanted to seal the feeling in his palm. However, once he sealed his senses, he would not be able to feel the recovery speed of the skin under his palm. Time trickled by. Time trickled by. With the support of Han Shanyue's telekinesis, the potion in the tub was maintained at a constant temperature. From time to time, waves of moving light breathing and moaning could be heard coming from the room. Fortunately, there was a barrier set up outside the house. No matter how big the commotion inside the house was, it wouldn't spread outside. Inside the bathtub, the old woman seemed to have been touched by a magical golden finger. Her skin became tender and youthful inch by inch, his white hair disappeared and was replaced by a head of long, black hair. The wrinkles on her face slowly extended and smoothed out. Her long eyelashes, perfectly shaped eyes, high nose bridge, and full lips appeared once again. Ning Xuema had never thought that she would have wet dreams. And it was a wet dream that felt incomparably real. In her dream, she was having sex with a man in a red silk tent. That man caressed every inch of her body, but he didn't kiss her. She vaguely felt that this was a dream, but she couldn't wake up no matter what. She didn't know how much time had passed, but she suddenly felt cold, as if someone had poured cold water on her head in the fog. Her body trembled, and the charming spring scenery in front of her suddenly melted away like spring snow. Chapter 6:14. Ning Xuema opened her eyes abruptly as if she had just woken up from a dream. What she saw was an ink-colored gauze curtain, not a red gauze curtain. Ning Xuema breathed a sigh of relief. It was indeed a dream. It was a wet dream that made her blood boil. Recalling the scene in her dream, she blushed. What was wrong with her? Why would she have such a wet dream? Was she really having a wet dream? It couldn't be. She closed her eyes and recalled the two figures in her dream. They were just two blurry blobs. Not to mention their faces, she couldn't even remember their figures. It was indeed a dream. It was her fault for not being able to remember the scene in her dream. She didn't know how many dreams she had over the years, but she couldn't remember a single one. When she woke up, all the dreams had dissipated like mist, leaving not the slightest impression in her mind. It was the same this time. The only difference was that she knew she had a wet dream this time. That feeling was so real. She even felt the legendary soreness after sex. But a dream was a dream. When she woke up, she didn't feel any pain in that area. She was in so much pain in her dream. As she regained consciousness, all of her memories came back to her one after another. She finally remembered everything that happened in that weird bathtub, and the memory was broken when Han Shanhua told her that it was supposed to be their wedding night. God, was she indecent at that time? She subconsciously raised her hand, and what she saw was a small hand that was as fair as spring onions. Her heart skipped a beat. She had recovered. She rolled up her sleeves to take a look. Her arms were as clear as jade. She was worried and rolled them up again. The wide and soft sleeves were rolled up to her shoulders. Her shoulders were soft and white. She had really recovered. The joy in her heart surged. To be on the safe side, she touched her chest and waist again. Her breasts were full and sharp, a perfect semicircle. Her waist was tight, and her skin was as smooth as cream. She had really recovered. She had really recovered. Ning Xuema's heart was bursting with joy. She urgently needed to look at herself in the mirror. She used her arms to support herself and tried to sit up. When she moved her arm, she actually pressed against something soft and hard. She subconsciously turned her head to look. Suddenly, he shuddered and laid back down on the pillow with a plop. Han Shanhua was lying beside her. At this moment, he had one arm supporting his head as he laid there, lazily looking at her. When did he lie beside her without making a sound? No, perhaps he had been there for a long time, but his breathing was too weak. After she woke up, she focused all her energy on recovering her body, so she did not notice him not far away from her. Ning Xuema had never expected that he would be sleeping next to her when she woke up. She was so shocked that she blurted out, "Why are you here?" Han Shanhua's long hair was loose, and his tightly buttoned shirt was a little loose, revealing a small section of his delicate collarbone. His long eyelashes were slightly lowered, and his thin lips were slightly pursed. He looked a little less cold, a little more aloof, and a little more lazy and casual. This made Ning Xuema's heart skip a beat. She looked away from his collarbone. She finally realized what she had pressed down on. It was his hand that was lying flat beside his body. I am your husband. Last night was our wedding night. Why do you think I am here? Han Shanyue asked lazily. Chapter 6:15. Bridal Chamber. These words shocked her again. Ning Xuema opened her eyes wide in shock. Was that not a dream? Was it real? She had consummated with him. She almost subconsciously wanted to touch her lower body. Fortunately, she immediately realized that this action was too bold and quickly stopped her hand. She felt her body slightly. It was said that after consummating on the wedding night, that place would be burning and the waist would be extremely sore. However, she did not feel anything there. She should not have been violated. Her waist was indeed a little sore, but it should not be that kind of soreness, right? Ning Xuema was not sure about her own assessment. She calmed herself down and blurted out, "We did not consummate, right?" She only realized that her words were a little silly after she asked. Han Shanyue's eyes deepened. "You are saying that you want to consummate with me?" Ning Xuema, who had just woken up, had a bright red face, as if she had applied a light layer of rouge. Her pair of eyes were bright and lively, and her red lips were plump and moist. At this moment, she probably hadn't completely reacted yet. Her pair of eyes were wide open, and her small mouth was slightly open. She looked extremely cute. Because of her touching just now, her nightgown was very messy, revealing 2 white arms, a white jade-like neck, and half of her breasts. She was as innocent as a young girl, but as charming as a fairy. Han Shanyue's heart skipped a beat, and his lower abdomen suddenly tightened. He suddenly had the urge to do something. Ning Xuema was choked by his question and subconsciously retorted, "Who wants to consummate with you?" After saying this, she turned over and wanted to get up. Lying on the same bed as him made her feel a little pressured. Her body had just moved when he caught her. Han Shanyue looked down at her and smiled faintly. "You really don't want to? You know, we are already husband and wife. If you have such needs, I will satisfy you." "Satisfy your head." He said it as if she was a pervert. As if he was forcing himself. His breath was too close, so close that it made her very uncomfortable. She coughed and said seriously, "Almighty, you're thinking too much. I'm just your shield concubine. I'm only there to shield you from peach blossoms. That doesn't include warming your bed." A shield. She was still saying that even today. Han Shanyue's breath turned cold. "After everything that happened yesterday, do you still think that you are a concubine who is used as a shield?" "What happened yesterday?" "Oh, that's right. When he removed the disguise for her yesterday, he had seen and touched her all over, but did he think that she would insist that he take responsibility for this? That was underestimating her too much. She wasn't that unstylish. She was not a woman from this era, not to mention being seen and touched by him. Even if she really lost that layer of membrane, if it wasn't for love, she wouldn't casually entrust her life to someone else." She coughed once, her small face calm. "Almighty, don't take what happened yesterday to heart. You were only treating me because you were in a hurry. I just treated it as a visit to a gynecologist and met a male doctor. I won't let you take responsibility." She felt that her words were profound enough, and he would feel relieved and comfortable after hearing it. But she didn't expect his breath to turn cold. The faint smile on his lips completely disappeared. "Don't take it to heart. A male doctor." Chapter 6:16. His voice was like an icy spring, coldly flowing in the air. "You're still so light, he didn't say the last word, as if saying it would dirty his mouth. After a pause, he coldly added, "Since that's the case, as you wish." With a gentle breeze, he was already gone. Ning Xuema was the only one left lying on the bed in the huge bedroom. Damn, he ran away just like that. Did he just say that she was frivolous? Frivolous your head. I was carried around and touched by you bastards like a rag. Did I do it willingly? I didn't care about these bastards, but I became the frivolous one. What kind of bastard logic is this? Ning Xuema's anger rose, and the good mood she had because she had regained her original appearance disappeared. She simply lifted the blanket and jumped off the bed, barefooted, and ran to the dressing mirror to look at her appearance. The mirror here wasn't the ordinary bronze mirror outside, but the mercury glass mirror used by modern people, which reflected people very clearly. What was shown in the mirror was a delicate face like a flower, with brows like the distant mountains, eyes like the ripples of autumn water, and lips like cherry blossoms. Her skin was like snow, and her eyes were as beautiful as a painting. She looked exactly the same as she did in her previous life. She let out a sigh of relief, feeling that the anger in her heart seemed to dissipate a little. She smiled at the mirror, and the girl in the mirror smiled back at her. Her bright eyes narrowed like crescent moons, and her light red lips curled upwards. She clearly had the appearance of a young girl, but her smile was bright and innocent, like a lily that people wanted to hold in the palm of their hands and protect. She didn't know how to do the complicated hairstyles of this era, so she just let her long hair down and trimmed it herself. After a while, she had a hairstyle that she was satisfied with. She looked at herself in the mirror, and it was the look she liked. She then looked at the rather loose nightgown on her body. It was made of snow-white material, and the simple and neat style was clearly someone's style. But it wasn't the style she liked. She looked around and finally found a few sets of women's clothes in a bedside cabinet. There were light yellow, light pink, snow white, and all kinds of styles. She picked out a set and compared it in front of the mirror, and felt that it was passable. Just as she was about to put it on, she lowered her head and felt like she was hit by a stick. The clothes in her hands fell to the ground. Her feet, which were originally like white jade crystals and could make men go crazy, were now in the shape of an old person's feet. Her skin was saggy, and there were light brown age spots on her feet. Her toes were like garlic cloves, pale and weak. How could this be? Ning Xuema's hands were also trembling. She couldn't help but lean over and roll up the loose trousers. The skin above the ankles belonged to a young man. Only her feet. This was the pair of feet that she had once been so proud of. Now they were completely. Why? Why was it that all the other parts of her body had recovered except for her legs? Did he did it? Or was there a unique treatment method for his feet? These two questions were rolling in her heart, and her hands and feet were cold. She took a deep breath, and then another. She calmed herself down. No, she had to ask him. She didn't want such feet. Her feet made her look like a monster. She couldn't accept it. Chapter 6:17. Ning Xuema hurriedly put on her clothes and shoes, opened the door, and came out. Only then did she realize that this was a separate courtyard. The snow-white courtyard walls were winding, and there were a few banana trees planted under the walls. In the courtyard, there was a piece of ink-black jade. One side was rough stone, and the other side was sparkling black jade. Under the sunlight, it shone with a crystal-clear luster. Ning Xuema couldn't help but touch the black stone, and her heart skipped a beat. This was Hitian jade. And such a big piece. A piece of this quality jade the size of a fist was worth a lot, not to mention such a big one. Even if such a piece of jade was found, it would be treasured by collectors. But now, it was casually placed here as a fake mountain. It seemed that Rongyue Tianlan was really rich and overbearing. She was really a deity in the world. She casually threw out a piece and it was enough to make people fight over it. The courtyard's decoration was quaint and had a sense of the mountains and the countryside. This style didn't seem like Rongyue Tianlan's, but more like Han Shanyue's, but at this time, Ning Xuema didn't have time to think about this. She had to quickly find Han Shanyue and ask him what was going on. She went out of the courtyard and looked around. Her small courtyard was located at the top of a mountain, and there was a winding path downwards. Under the cover of the green trees, there were pavilions and terraces looming. Seeing the golden trees planted on both sides of the mountain road, Ning Xuema knew that she was still on Rongyue Tianlan's carefree island. Where would Han Shanyue go in a rage? He should have gone to find Rongyue Tianlan to play chess, right? Ning Xuema ran all the way down. Although her feet were still the feet of an old person, it didn't hinder her running, and she was still very fast. In the process of running, Ning Xuema also felt that her mind power had recovered, and her body was as light as flying. She first used telepathy to contact Kirin. Kirin told her that it was bathing in a very big lake. It said that it had wanted to watch Han Shanyue heal her last night, but it was blocked by his barrier. No matter what, it could not enter. Helpless, it could only wander around. Ning Xuema interrupted its nagging. Where is God Han? Did you see that? No, didn't he have a wedding night with you? Shouldn't he be with you? Kirin was even more confused than her. Ning Xuema was speechless. It seemed like her and Han Shanyue's wedding night was confirmed. He was obviously trying to remove the disguise for her, so how did it become the wedding night? She was too lazy to explain to Kirin and interrupted it. Then have you seen Island Master Rongyu? Yes, I saw him drinking tea under the red heart tree early in the morning. Bright red leaves that looked like hearts danced in the air. Under the big tree, Rongyue Tianlan was sitting under the tree, drinking tea in a light green robe. There was a book on his lap, and he looked very relaxed. Seeing Ning Xuema rushing in, he was slightly stunned. Miss Ning. Ning Xuema nodded and smiled brightly. It's me. Good morning, Brother Rongyue. Rongyue Tianlan's eyes flashed with surprise. When he first met Ning Xuema, she was still an old lady with wrinkled skin and white hair. He also knew that her original body must be beautiful. He didn't expect that she would be so beautiful. In other words, it was difficult to describe her simply as beautiful. She was wearing a light pink dress, and her black hair covered her forehead. Her black hair was like satin hanging around her body. Chapter 6:18. Ning Xuema had big eyes and long eyelashes. Her smile was like a crescent moon, bright and resplendent. Her red lips were plump like cherry blossoms. When the corners of her lips curled up, it was exceptionally sweet, like a child who didn't know the ways of the world. She was like a doll that made people let down their guard for no reason and only wanted to kiss her heart and lungs. Rongyue Tianlan boasted that he was a romantic and had seen all kinds of beauties. Naturally, his eyes were very sharp and very picky. His standards were also ridiculously high. Ordinary beauties couldn't enter his eyes. However, this girl made his eyes light up. Among the thousands of beauties he had seen, she might not be the most beautiful, but she had the most temperament and the one that people couldn't take their eyes off. Yunxi was also a pure and peerless beauty. Her facial features were even slightly more exquisite than the girl in front of him, but she was far from being as dazzling as the girl in front of him. Yunxi was like a clear stream, and the girl in front of him was like a fire lotus in full bloom in the ice and snow. Dazzling and beautiful, clear and alluring. Yes, clear and alluring. The two were originally contradictory, but strangely combined in one person, causing people to be inexplicably moved. Even Rongyue Tianlan, who was used to seeing beauties, faintly felt his heart palpitate. Miss Ning is so beautiful. No wonder. Rongyue Tianlan paused and added in his heart, no wonder Dizwa, that 1,000-year-old iceberg, kept making exceptions for you. This sentence was unavoidably rude to the beauty, so Rongyue Tianlan changed his words halfway. Miss Ning, you've recovered well. Ning Xuema smiled faintly. Not bad. She looked around and didn't see Han Shanyue's shadow. Mr. Rongyue, have you seen Great God Han? Rongyue Tianlan coughed. He left the island for some matters. Left? Did he just leave her here without saying a word? What did he mean? He didn't want her as a shield. Or did he leave her here temporarily because he had other matters to attend to? Then what about her leg? When will he be back? Rongyue Tianlan shook his head. This, he didn't say. Dizwa's behavior had always been unpredictable, and it was even more so this morning. Rongyue Tian had just finished a round of martial arts when she turned around and saw Dizwa standing behind her. Although Dizwa had always been elusive, his sudden appearance startled Rongyue Tianlan. Dizwa was actually wearing a loose sleeping robe. It was true that this did not affect Dizwa's beauty, but this was the first time Yu Tianlan had seen him so slovenly. After this night, he thought that he would be able to see a radiant Dizwa in high spirits. However, he didn't expect that Dizwa would still be able to cover the sky like a blanket. When Han Shanyue saw him, he only said one sentence to him, I have something to do and have to go out. Take care of her. After that, the old man fluttered his sleeves and left. He was left with a belly full of questions and no one to ask. Now that he had seen Ning Xuema, he wanted to find a breakthrough through her. He quietly looked her up and down. After that night, she was still a virgin. Could it be that Dizwa's expression was because he was dissatisfied? Rongyue Tian guessed in her heart. Miss Ning, did you two quarrel? Rongyu Ishanlin asked tentatively. He actually felt that it was unlikely. With Dizwa's temperament, it was unlikely that he would quarrel with others. This was because he wouldn't get angry easily. Once he got angry, he would immediately extinguish it. He wouldn't do something as useless as quarreling. Chapter 6:19. Ning Xuema shook her head. What she did with him didn't count as an argument, right? She just didn't know which of her words had provoked Master Han and made him leave in a huff. It seemed like her shield had blocked the most troublesome peach blossoms for him. He had achieved his goal, so he didn't care about her anymore. He threw her to his friend just like that. Did that mean she was free from now on? Ning Xuema raised her hand and touched the snow-shaped cinnabar mole on her forehead. What about her heavenly marriage symbol? Also, what about her feet? Miss Ning, is there something troubling you? Rongyue Tianlan sensed that Ning Xuema had something on her mind. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Island Master Rongyue was the one who had thought of this method to remove the disguise technique. Perhaps he had other ways before her feet had recovered. She immediately spoke of her difficulties. Island Master Rongyue, the rest of my body has recovered quite well, but my legs are still in their original strange state. You should have other ways, right? Rongyue Tianlan was stunned and didn't speak for a while. He had clearly told Dizwa that once this method was started, it had to be removed from head to toe without stopping. Otherwise, all the previous efforts would be wasted, and it would be very difficult to recover from the parts that couldn't be recovered. He believed that Dizwa had listened to him. Why did he leave her with a future problem? Was he exhausted halfway, or did he have a bad taste for old people's feet? Well, the last one seemed unlikely. Who would have such a strong taste for old people's feet? Exhaustion didn't seem right either. He remembered that after Diswa had finished casting the technique on Ning Xuema, he had personally carried her out of the secret treatment room. Although Diswa's face was pale, his footsteps were steady. It didn't seem like he was exhausted. Even if he had used up a lot of telekinesis, he should still have enough telekinesis to recover her feet. Then what about her feet? Could there be other reasons? Miss Ning, your feet haven't recovered at all. Yes, they're still the same. That's strange. Rongyue Tianlan frowned and pondered. He even forgot to wave his fan. Could it really be Diswa's bad taste? Ning Xuema's heart sank. She looked at her anxiously. Does Island Master Rongyue also have no other way? Rongyue Tian was a little embarrassed and spread out her hands. After all, I didn't see the specific situation. Before she could finish her sentence, her eyes widened. Miss Ning. Without saying a word, Ning Xuema took off one of her shoes and socks and showed it to him. Now you see it. When going to the hospital to see a doctor, he naturally had to show the doctor his injury. Even if it was a slightly private place, he still had to show it to others sometimes, not to mention that it was just a foot. Ning Xuema was even more open about it. She was a modern woman, and it was common for modern women to walk barefoot. Rongyue Tian took a step back as if she had been stung by a scorpion. This lady is too bold. She actually showed her feet to other men. This was simply too audacious. Ning Xuema knew that the people of this era were more conservative and tried their best not to let other men see a woman's body. However, she didn't know that in this era, a woman's small feet were equivalent to her third sex. It was second only to her chest and private parts. Generally, only her husband had the right to see a woman's small feet, and it was on their wedding night. Chapter 620. But now, Ning Xuema actually revealed her feet in such a grandiose manner, showing it back to him, a complete stranger. This was simply an eye-opener for Rongyue Tianlan. So much so that she even had a bit of doubt towards Ning Xuema's character. Rongyue Tianlan only glanced at her foot and quickly looked away. He said seriously, Miss Ning, please don't be like this. Please put on your shoes and socks properly. He couldn't tease his friend's wife. Moreover, she was someone from Diswa. He couldn't cross the line. Otherwise, Diswa would definitely send him flying. Now that Island Master has seen the symptoms of my foot, is there a way to recover it? Ning Xuema put on her shoes and socks. She was most concerned about this. I think, you can ask your great god Han about this. Ning Xuema lowered her eyes. Island Master, you don't have a way. He wanted to ask that great god, but before he could ask, that person had already disappeared, didn't he? Rongyue Tianlan thought for a moment. Miss Ning, please wait for a moment. He decided to contact Diswa first. Rongyue Tianlan went out. After a while, he came back and saw Ning Xuema standing under the tree, talking to Kirin. The wind blew up her black hair and pink clothes. The fiery red leaves twirled around her. It was as beautiful as a painting. At this moment, he suddenly felt that this girl in front of him might be more suited to wear red clothes. This thought only flashed through his mind. He walked over. Miss Ning. Ning Xuema stood up slightly and looked at him. Island Master, have you contacted Mr. Han? She actually guessed what he was doing just now. She was really smart. He shook his head. Mr. Han might be in a hurry. I couldn't contact him. He and Diswa had a sound transmission talisman. Usually, they could keep in touch without any obstruction. This time, he didn't know why, but there was no answer on the other end. He couldn't do anything at the moment. Ning Xuema smiled. Forget it. In any case, thank you for your kindness in removing my disguise. Shuama will not disturb you any longer. Please send Shuama and Kirin out of the island. She wanted to leave. How could this be? Before Deeswa left, he had clearly entrusted her to him. If he let her go like this, where would he find her when Deeswa came back? Miss Ning, your body hasn't fully recovered yet. You still need to rest for a few more days. Why don't you stay here and wait until you've recovered before you leave? Ning Shuema shook her head. I don't think so. I'll have to recuperate after I go out. Besides, I still need to find a doctor. She didn't believe that no one in this big world could cure her foot. She wanted others to look at her feet. Rongyue Tianlan did not dare to let her go and tried every means to make her stay. However, Ning Shuema had already made up her mind. Rongyue Tianlan had no choice but to use his trump card. Miss Ning, you don't need to go to other places to seek treatment. I have a way. This sentence was like a shot of adrenaline for Ning Shuema. Her eyes immediately sparkled. Rongyue Tianlan looked at her pair of sparkling eyes and felt a little pressured. She muttered to herself for a moment and said, there is a way, but this method is very torturous for you. That kind of torment is not something that ordinary people can endure. Therefore, I feel a little embarrassed and don't want to do it. Chapter 621. Ning Shuema took a deep breath and said, Mister, why don't you tell me about it? She had experienced all kinds of torment when she was a secret agent. Ordinary torment could not scare her. Rongyu Ishinlan glanced at her and asked, was your foot seriously injured before? Did you use the Qilin armor to recover? Yes. That's right. Is this the reason why my foot could not recover? Ning Shuema suddenly understood. Rongyu Ishinlan nodded and said, yes. Although the Qilin armor healed your injury, it also changed the nature of the skin on your feet. Therefore, it could not be treated at the same time as other parts of your body. Ning Shuema understood. In other words, the Qilin armor had changed the genes on her feet. Different genes had different treatment methods. After knowing the exact cause, Rongyu Ishinlan finally told her his treatment plan. His plan did sound cruel. However, Ning Shuema gritted her teeth and agreed to it in order to recover. Although this method made Ning Shuema suffer, it was not risky. Ning Shuema's life was not in danger. Therefore, Rongyu Ishinlan contacted Han Shanhue again to ask for his advice. After failing to contact him, Rongyu Ishinlan decided on his own. Anyway, Ning Shuema agreed to it. He could not bear to let such a beautiful girl have such a big flaw. If Deeswa came back, the beauty would have recovered. At most, he would blame himself for being reckless and acting on his own. It should not be a big deal. Have you seen the boiling purple sludge? This time, Ning Shuema's horizons were broadened. The bubbling purple sludge was placed in a small pool made of special materials. A strong, pungent smell of medicine filled the entire room. It was so strong that it made people dizzy. Kirin tilted its head and looked at the pool of medicine. It could not suppress its curiosity and stretched out a claw to explore the sludge. Then, as if he had been struck by lightning, he quickly retreated and said, it's hot. 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 Ning Shuema wore a set of special clothes and stood by the small pool. Looking at the boiling liquid, her heart was filled with uncertainty. The temperature is so high. Won't she be cooked if she jumps in? Rong Yuetian stood not far away from her. The temperature of this medicinal soup will always be at this temperature and will not change. If you wear these clothes, your skin won't be scalded. But you can feel the temperature of this medicinal soup. Cough, cough, I said that you will suffer a little. It's not too late for you to regret it now. My whole body is going to be soaked in. Rongyue Tianlan nodded her head cautiously. That's right. You have to let this medicinal paste completely cover your body. Even your face can't be exposed outside. After you jump in, the medicinal paste will wrap you up like an airtight clay figurine. You have to stay in there for 2 days. Your body will be reconstructed and your legs will naturally recover. At that time, we'll be able to shatter the godly soil and complete our mission. Why did it sound so much like making beggars chicken? Ning Xuema was embarrassed. She was sure that Island Master Rongyue would not cheat her. For a pair of healthy legs, she would go all out. The clothes she was wearing were like soft silk armor. It wrapped her tightly from head to toe, but it was very breathable. She could also see and hear the sounds outside. She first tried to reach her hand into the mud. The scorching heat spread throughout her body like lightning. She gritted her teeth and endured for a moment. Then, she retracted her hand and checked carefully. Her skin did not show any signs of being scalded. Chapter 622. Rongyue Tianlan was right. This was a living torture. She was about to go down when she thought of a terrible question. Island Lord Rongyue, after I go in, the mud will wrap me up like a clay figurine. Can I breathe in there? Rongyue Tianlan was stunned and suddenly slapped her head. Oh no! She really couldn't breathe in there. This method could treat people with high cultivation like her who could live without breathing, but ordinary people. Although she wouldn't be cooked in there, she would suffocate to death. Rongyue Tianlan broke out in cold sweat. Fortunately, Ning Xuema remembered to ask in advance. If she recklessly jumped in just now, once she was suffocated in there, he wouldn't know. 2 days later, the mud shell would be broken and her corpse would be peeled out. At that time, the old man Disuo would skin her alive. Miss Ning is right. I miscalculated. We will think of other ways, Rongyue Tianlan began to walk around the small pool. Ning Xuema looked at her clothes and then at the pool of mud. She frowned slightly. To be exact, this pool wasn't made of mud, but of medicinal paste. It was made from various rare herbs. Just preparing the herbs alone took a day. In addition, Rongyue Tianlan personally supervised the medical apprentices at the side in order to control the efficacy and temperature of the medicine. She didn't sleep the whole night, that was why this pool of medicinal paste was made. Also, this set of clothes was specially made for her using some kind of heavenly silk. A pair of gloves made of heavenly silk was already a priceless treasure, not to mention that she was dressed from head to toe. Rongyue Tianlan could be said to have put in a lot of effort to treat her feet. Everything was ready. Were they really going to give up like this? Not only was Rongyue Tianlan unwilling, but Ning Xuema was also unwilling. A day and a night had passed, and Han Shanyue hadn't moved. Rongyue Tianlan still couldn't contact him. Naturally, she couldn't wait for him to come back and ask for instructions. As for Ning Xuema, her husband had run away, so she didn't see anything wrong with him. She ate, drank, and enjoyed the scenery. She even played 2 games of chess with Rongyue Tianlan. Both of them had wins and losses, which made Rongyue Tianlan have a whole new level of respect for her chess skills. If it weren't for the fact that he was busy making the medicinal decoction, he would have liked to play chess with Ning Xuema for an entire day. Kirin looked at Ning Xuema, who was deep in thought, and then looked at Rongyue Yishenlin, who was circling the pool like an ant on a hot pan. He said weakly, "Can you take out a few of my master's souls and leave one to guard the house? This way, she won't feel any pain and won't need to breathe. When she's better, I'll put her soul in. Its words were like a bolt of lightning, striking Rong Yuetian so hard that she stopped in her tracks. He seemed to have been enlightened and was instantly enlightened. His figure flashed and he appeared beside the little Qilin. He slapped it on the head and said, "That's right. Why didn't I think of that? Ha, little apple, I didn't expect you to be so smart." In his excitement, he didn't control the strength of his hand accurately. This slap made Kirin somersault and almost rolled into the boiling pool. Fortunately, Ning Xuema's hands and eyes were quick. She managed to grab its horn in time and stopped its rolling momentum. Kirin was so scared that it broke out in a sweat. It jumped up and shouted angrily, "Are you trying to kill me?" Chapter 623. Rongyue Tianlan was awakened by Kirin's words, but he wasn't angry after being scolded by it. He patted its head comfortingly and said, "I'm sorry, my hand slipped." Kirin proudly turned its head to avoid his hand. It wouldn't let anyone pat its head. Since they had found a solution, the two of them didn't hesitate anymore. Before casting the spell, Rongyue Tianlan told Ning Xuemo that he would take out her soul and seal it in the force field, leaving only one soul in her body to look after the house. The rest of her soul could stay in the house and watch from above. Ning Xuemo nodded and looked at Rongyue Tianlan with a complicated gaze. She heard that this soul extraction technique could only be done by deities who had cultivated their telekinesis to the heavenly stage. It seemed that Rongyue Tianlan had also cultivated to the heavenly stage. However, probably because he was detached from worldly affairs and didn't enter the mortal world, he wasn't famous on this continent. If Han Shangyue hadn't brought her here, she wouldn't have known that there was such a person on this continent. It seemed that the information obtained by Changkong Nation wasn't accurate. Those who were recorded were all famous. Weren't there a lot of people like Rongyue Tianlan in this continent? This was the so-called otherworldly expert. Then was the one who established the blood contract between her and the little Qilin also this kind of expert? It seemed that there were all kinds of hidden dragons and crouching tigers on this continent. She wondered what level Yinqi's telekinesis had reached. There was also Shui Lan. That bastard's martial arts were also very strange. His cultivation might have also reached the heavenly stage. Thinking of Shui Lan, she suddenly remembered something and her expression changed slightly. When she was removing the disguise technique, Han Shangyue touched all over her body. Then, when this bastard changed her appearance, did he also touch her all over? Thinking of his hand touching all over her body, Ning Xuemo had goosebumps all over her body. She paused and gritted her teeth to ask this question, "Island Lord Rongyue, is the method to remove the disguise technique the same?" Although it was a bit embarrassing to ask this question, if she didn't ask, she was afraid that she would always have doubts in her heart. Rongyue Tianlan shook her head and said, "That's not necessary. This is called a disguise technique, but in fact, he gave you a kind of poison. After giving you this medicine, he used his own blood to activate this kind of poison. It will make you become an old woman in 2 hours." So he didn't touch her all over her body. Ning Xuemo finally. Who was this Shui Lan? To be able to play goose so well, could he be the ancestor of Gu? What about his own body? Did he also use this kind of disguise technique to become a wretched old man? Was it so troublesome for him? Rong Yuetian shook her head. "I didn't see the person's specific appearance, so it's hard to judge. Maybe he himself, but T.S. is right." This was indeed a possibility. Ning Xuemo nodded her head. She secretly swore in her heart that if she ever saw that bastard Shui Lan again one day, she would definitely destroy his face that could bring disaster to a country, and then chop him into 8 pieces. That bastard almost destroyed her. She had a big grudge with him. The doubts in her heart were solved and Ning Xuemo's heart relaxed a lot. Following Rongyue Tianlan's instructions, she sat down cross-legged. After a complicated operation by Rongyue Tianlan, after a quarter of an hour, Ning Xuema's soul was successfully extracted. Only a part of it was left in her body. Chapter 624. Rongyue Yishanlan waved her sleeves again and set up a green spherical enchantment, carefully placing Ning Xuema's soul in it. It felt weird to appear in the state of a soul. Ning Xuema felt like a wisp of smoke, a gust of wind, floating in the enchantment. If the green enchantment didn't stop her, she might have flown out involuntarily. She curiously lay on the enchantment and watched Rongyue Yishanlan raise her hand to lift her sitting body in the air and slowly put her down into the bubbling mud. She watched as her body was slowly swallowed by the mud inch by inch. The mud in the small pool seemed to have smelled something delicious and surged in the direction of her body, swirling around. Gradually, a mud shell formed around her body, like a small round coffin rolling up and down in the mud. This scene made all of Ning Xuema's hairs stand on end. Fortunately, her soul was lifted out. Fortunately, she couldn't feel it. Otherwise, the feeling of rolling and steaming in there was really unbearable. She just didn't know if her body would be cooked after breaking the mud shell. Steamed beauty was also a good dish. She looked at Rongyue Yishanlan. Rongyue Yishanlan was standing by the pool, afraid that something would happen to her and he wouldn't be able to explain himself, so he had been quietly guarding her. From time to time, he used his consciousness to sense Ning Xuema's body in the mud shell. Probing her vitality, his consciousness was also quite taxing, and he also had to feel the high temperature inside, so every time he probed, he would sweat profusely. It looked very tiring. Ning Xuema didn't feel anything. Her soul stayed in the green enchantment, but she felt a little bored. She looked at Kirin for a while, and then looked at Rongyue Yishanlan for a while. She saw Rongyue Yishanlan's hard work. A person with such high skills could make it so hot just by probing with her consciousness. If her original soul was inside, she was afraid that she would have wanted to commit suicide. Fortunately, there was Kirin's reminder. At the critical moment, it turned out that there were times when it didn't drop the chain. Ning Xuema looked at Rongyue Yishanlan with gratitude, and when she looked at Kirin, it was gentle. Kirin was originally very playful, but at this time, it was worried about its master. Its eyes were also wide open, staring at the mud shell without blinking. Ning Xuema's main body was in the state of a soul. If it didn't use special methods, it couldn't see it all the time. In the first 4 hours, Kirin used telepathy to chat with Ning Xuema every 15 minutes to ask her about her situation. Naturally, Ning Xuema's answer reassured it. Rongyue Yishanlan was able to see her soul. In these 2 hours, he would occasionally raise his eyes to look at Ning Xuema who was inside the barrier. Seeing that she was fine, he felt relieved. There was a sign that she was gradually was Xuema's body. After Rongyue Yishanlan kept watch here for 3 hours, he saw that everything was indeed back to normal. It was a little boring for him to keep watch here. He took out the chessboard, sat there, and played chess with himself. Ning Xuema watched from inside the enchantment. She was itching to play, so she spoke up to represent one side to play. It was Rongyue Yishanlan's first time playing chess with a soul. It was quite fun, so he let her represent the black side, and he took the white piece himself. One person and one soul played chess there. Ning Xuema was in the state of a soul, and her mind wasn't as clear as it was normal. So when she played chess with Rongyue Yishanlan this time, she lost 2 out of 3 games. Chapter 625. Playing Go consumed a lot of brain power. Ning Xuema was in the state of a soul, so the consumption was particularly large. After 5 games, she was so tired that she wanted to sleep. Rongyue Yishanlan finally noticed her discomfort. He saw that she was swaying in the force field and couldn't maintain her shape. She was obviously in a state of overexertion. He couldn't help but hit his head with the fan. For so many years, he had been dealing with the strongest people. No matter what he did, there was always a kind of habitual thinking in it. He always forgot that Ning Xuemo was just an ordinary person. An ordinary person's soul couldn't be so exhausted. He hurriedly put away the chessboard. Miss Ning, your soul will be hurt like this. It's better to recuperate in the force field. You can meditate to recover. Souls could meditate. Ning Xuemo tried to regulate her breath in the force field. She closed her eyes slightly and meditated for a while. Sure enough, the tiredness lessened a lot. Rongyu Yishanlin saw her like this and breathed a sigh of relief. He used his consciousness to check her body again. Her body was also fine. He was about to find something to do to pass the time when a child reported from outside, Island Master, Palace Master Yunxi is here. Yunxi actually came back. It seemed that she was going to get rid of the knot in her heart. Rongyue Tianlan's heart was filled with joy. In the end, he was worried about his old friend, so he instructed Ning Xuemo to focus on recuperating inside the barrier. When the time came, he would naturally let her out. He turned back to look for Kirin, but found that the little guy's shadow was gone. It turned out that Kirin saw that Ning Xuemo's soul had been playing chess with Rongyu Yishanlin. It really had nothing to do with it. It was also a playful thing, so it ran out to play. Rongyu Yishanlin didn't see it, but he guessed that it had run away. He couldn't help but rub his forehead with the fan. He gave Ning Xuemo a few more instructions before going out. Only Ning Xuemo was left in the big hall. She sat in the force field and meditated for a while. Then, she looked at the mud shell rolling in the mud. She yawned in boredom. This kind of time was a bit unbearable. She might as well sleep first. Rongyue Tianlan had said before that sleeping was also a way for souls to cultivate. She simply lay down inside the force field. The force field set up by Rongyu Yishanlin was very authentic. It could change its shape according to her movements inside. When she lay down, it also became a long strip. It flowed around Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo couldn't help poking it with her finger. It was soft like a balloon. She poked a few more times, and a question flashed through her mind. I wonder if this barrier will break as easily as an eggshell. She poked a few more times out of boredom. In her boredom, her thoughts began to drift. Where did that bastard Shui Lan go after he escaped? If she were to catch him one day, she would make sure that he would often be immobilized and tortured by others. Was Han Shanyue really not going to turn back? It had already been a day and a night, and he hadn't even contacted his good friends. As expected of the legend of this continent, he was able to let go so easily. Looks like it's time for my shield concubine to retire, but what about the wedding? Oh right, she was now in the state of a soul. Was the cinnabar mole still there? She couldn't help but raise her hand to touch it. In the state of a soul, her sense of touch wasn't sensitive. She touched nothing. She smiled to herself. The soul had no physical body. She couldn't touch it. She couldn't even sense where her body was. It seemed that she could take any shape she wanted. Chapter 626. Ning Xuemo curled up into a ball, stretched into a straight line like a stick, and then into the shape of a flower. She realized that as long as she thought about it, the shape of her soul would immediately change, and it would be exactly the same as what she imagined. That was fun. This feeling was not something that she could experience at any time. She suddenly had an idea. Could she turn into a sharp sword and cut through the wizardry barrier? Just as she thought about it, she heard a soft thud. Her body became light, and a green light flashed in front of her eyes. When she realized what had happened, she was already outside the wizardry barrier. Ning Xuemo was speechless. Wasn't this barrier too much like a piece of paper? She had just thought about it, and she immediately broke through the barrier. Was her soul too powerful, or was his wizardry barrier too weak? Ning Xuemo could not figure it out at the moment. She circled around the hall and looked at the mud shell. She could not help but fly down to take a closer look. Unexpectedly, before she could really get close to the mud shell, she felt a strong suction force from the mud shell, and it suddenly pulled her down. Ning Xuemo was almost pulled down by the suction force. She hurriedly flew up and finally broke free from the suction force. She was still in a state of shock as she stuck her body to the wizardry barrier and looked at the mud shell. Suddenly, she realized that the mud shell was her body. Once she got close to it, she would naturally be attracted to it. Damn it, I was almost sucked in. I almost went in there to taste the high temperature and the feeling of being suffocated to death. She did not dare to get close to the mud shell. Her body floated up and circled around the hall a few times. She felt that her body was a little scattered, as if her arms and legs were going to be separated from her body. Oh no! Her soul was going to be scattered. Once the soul was scattered, she did not know if it could be gathered again. This was Ning Xuemo's last thought in the hall. After this thought, her vision blurred, and she did not know anything else. The blood-red fog. There was no end to it. The world was completely covered by the blood-red fog, and the air was filled with the smell of blood. Ning Xuemo felt as if she was walking in such a blood fog. From time to time, all kinds of strange noises could be heard coming from the blood fog. There were screams that sounded like humans and beasts. In the depths of the fog, there was even the sound of teeth tearing through flesh. The combination of these strange sounds made the hair of those who walked among them stand on end. Blood mist filled the air, and the gloomy aura was chilling. This place seemed to have been abandoned by God. Sunlight could no longer shine here. It was terrifyingly cold. Ning Xuemo could not help but shrink back. Although she was bold, being alone in such an environment, she still felt a little scared. She couldn't tell the direction in the fog, so she could only choose a random direction and run. She couldn't wait to get out of this demonic area. The blood mist in front of her suddenly rolled like waves, and there seemed to be footsteps rushing towards her. She was stunned and instinctively dodged to the side. A young man in white rushed out of the blood mist in front of her. This young man in white seemed to have just gone through a fight. His white robe was stained with blood, and his hair was messy, covering his face. Ning Xuemo could not see his appearance clearly, but she could faintly feel that this young man should be very beautiful. This young man looked to be around 12 or 13 years old, but his skills were already extraordinary. As he ran, there were all kinds of beasts that came out of the blood mist to bite him, but they were all dealt with in a few moves. Chapter 627. Ning Xuemo was hiding in the dark. She had only seen him fight a few times, and she was sure that this young man was a ruthless character. In the battle, he was willing to let himself be injured in order to quickly finish off his enemies. For example, there was a very cunning snake. It flew around the young man like lightning, and when the young man was fighting with other monsters, it would bite the young man. Once it was bitten, it would run away immediately. It did not want to continue fighting. After the young man suffered a few losses, he simply ignored it and focused on fighting with other monsters. He was attacked a few more times by the snake. The snake did not suffer any losses. The more it attacked, the bolder it became. Slowly, its body could stay on the young man's body for a longer time when it bit him. At the last time, when it bit the young man's skin, it sucked a mouthful of his blood. A sudden change happened at that moment. The young man, who had been ignoring it, suddenly reached out and grabbed the snake's vital point. The snake was shocked when its vital point was caught. It struggled in his hand and said, "Old Six, you can't kill me. I'm your younger brother. I'm your younger brother. Younger brother." The young man chuckled. Ning Xuema felt a chill in her heart. For some reason, she felt that the young man's laughter was very cold. It was as if he was going to make a big move in the next moment. Ning Xuema was right. After the young man laughed, he directly broke the snake's neck. The snake's blood sprayed all over him. This scene was very cruel, but Ning Xuema did not know why she was very excited when she saw it. It was as if she also liked the taste of blood. She could not help but follow the young man. She watched him kill in the blood fog and saw the blood of all kinds of monsters sprayed on his body. She watched his white clothes turn into red clothes. The blood fog seemed to be endless. The sound of ghosts crying in the blood fog became louder. The young man encountered more ambushes. After all, he was not made of iron. His body seemed to be getting weaker and weaker. Finally, after being ambushed by another monster, he sat down with a thud. The blood mist seemed to have faded a little. 5 green-robed men walked out of the blood mist one after another and surrounded the young man from before. From their conversation, Ning Xuema knew that the 5 green-robed men were the elder brothers of the young man. They were reprimanding the young man for his evil deed of killing his brothers. The young man didn't say a word at first, but after they finished scolding him, he smiled gently. Ning Xuema couldn't see his face clearly, but for some reason, she felt that his smile was very enchanting. After the young man smiled, he only said a few words. "You guys never treated me as a brother. You called me a bastard." His words made Ning Xuema feel sad for no reason. Chapter 628. 10,000 snakes moved out and formed this blood fog array, wanting to kill this young man inside. Even his so-called blood brothers were among the snakes that wanted to kill him. These 5 brothers were also very cunning. They only appeared when the young man in white was exhausted. They obviously wanted to take advantage of the situation. Not a single word was exchanged. Another bloody battle ensued. That young man was clearly so weak that he was about to die, but at this moment, it was as if he had been injected with stimulants and was reinvigorated. Once again, he fought with his life on the line against these 5 people. Ning Xuema crossed her arms and watched from the side. She began to admire this young man. Ruthless, ruthless. He was also very scheming and had many tricks up his sleeves when facing his enemies. His weakness just now was not real. It was just a ploy to lure the snake out of its hole. Now that the snake was lured out, he naturally fought with his life on the line. In the battle, his tricks were endless. Slowly, the 5 brothers who originally had the upper hand were killed one by his tricks. When only one of the 5 brothers was left, he finally realized that things were not going well. He turned around and wanted to run, but was captured by him. After that person was captured, he begged the young man in white, playing the family card. He said that he was forced by others to come, but in his heart, he had always treated him as a brother. This person was very eloquent. He recalled the past with this young man. From these words and the reaction of the young man in white, Ning Xuema knew that the one who survived was this young man's 3rd brother. He usually took good care of him. For example, when he was punished to kneel for no reason, 3rd brother had secretly given him food. Although it was just scraps of food, it was enough for him to survive and not starve to death. There were 7 or 8 similar incidents. The young man's murderous aura finally calmed down. He said, "All right, on account of our past relationship, I'll spare your life." Then, he let go of the hand that was holding his 3rd brother's neck. Ning Xuema's heart jumped. Her intuition told her that this was bad. Her intuition had always been very accurate. This time was no exception. Before the third brother's body landed on the ground, the poisonous blade in his hand had already pierced through the young man's abdomen. That young man in white was also ruthless. Even after suffering such a heavy injury, he did not care. Instead, he suddenly pounced forward and grabbed his third brother's neck. This time, he didn't show any mercy at all. Instead, he directly cut off all of third brother's chances of survival. His third brother, like his other brothers, returned to his original form after death and remained motionless. Due to his reckless charge, the dark green poisonous blade pierced through his body and came out from his back. Fresh blood dyed the remaining white of his white robe red, and the white robe was completely dyed red. After all, he was still a child. After killing so many people in one breath, he finally couldn't hold on any longer and fell to the ground with a plop. Perhaps his ruthlessness just now had scared off the other pursuers. This young man had been lying on the ground for a full quarter of an hour, but no one took the opportunity to attack him. He struggled a few times on the ground, looking like he really wanted to get up. However, he was obviously exhausted from his injuries this time. He struggled a few times but still couldn't get up. He simply lay there and raised his blood-stained hand to look at it. Why? Why can't you tolerate me? Why? He seemed to be laughing and crying at the same time. His hands were stained with someone else's blood or his own. Drops of blood dripped down. Chapter 629. Fresh blood dripped onto the neck and body of the white-clothed youth. His entire body seemed to have been fished out from blood. More people walked out from the blood fog. These people obviously wanted to harm him as well. They fanned out and surrounded him. There were more than 10 of them. Their eyes flashed with cold murderous intent. The youth naturally sensed the approach of these people, but he was already in despair. He did not want to get up again. Blood flowed like a river, but he could not fight for any chance of survival. No matter how hard he tried, he would not be able to escape death today. Probably with this thought in mind, the youth lay there without moving. He just closed his eyes slightly. Clang! Clang! A few zither sounds suddenly came from the blood fog. The zither sounds were clear and melodious. It was not a tune, but it strangely dispersed the blood fog and returned everything to its original state. The zither sounds came from above Ning Xuema's head, startling Ning Xuema. She looked in the direction of the zither sounds and saw a big tree not far behind her. The branches and leaves of the tree were all withered and burnt, leaving only the bare tree trunk like a horned dragon. On the tree trunk, a young girl in red sat diagonally. She did not know why, but the moment Ning Xuema saw the young girl in red, her heart felt like it was hit by a big hammer. The young girl was dressed in a fiery red dress. She wore a hood of the same color on her head. Her face was hidden in the shadow of the hood, making it impossible for people to see her face clearly. On her knees was a dark blue zither. The color of the zither was like the waves of the sea. It shone faintly under the moonlight. The young girl was leaning against the tree trunk. Her hands were lazily strumming the zither strings. Her bare feet were swaying there. It was a full moon night. Under the moonlight, she looked like an elf, a dark elf. The people who were about to surround the youth became restless. Countless gazes looked towards the young girl. The dying youth also looked over. From his direction, the most conspicuous thing he could see was her feet. Her small feet were as white as snow, and there were silver chains around her ankles. There were 2 small silver bells hanging from the chains, and as her small feet moved, the silver bells jingled. Coupled with the sound of the zither that she casually played, there was actually a kind of soul-stirring power that made everyone's eyes widen. The sound of the zither seemed to have a great influence on these people. Their tempers became impetuous, and they all asked for the girl's name. The young girl casually plucked the strings of the zither and said in a cold voice, "So many people bullying one person, it's really annoying." She didn't know if it was because of the sound of the zither, but the group of people became very irritable. This girl's ordinary sentence actually provoked 4 or 5 men to rush towards her. "If you don't like it, then stay together. Play with us." Those 4 or 5 people's kung fu was obviously not bad. Their figures were like a whirlwind as they rushed over. The young girl was not in a hurry. When they got close, her fingers suddenly plucked the zither strings. This time, it wasn't a musical note that came out, but a light red wave of light. This light red wave of light was like a meteor or lightning. After the light wave flashed, the 4 or 5 people who rushed over had already lost their heads. Their bodies ran forward 2 steps on the ground, and then fell to the ground with a loud bang. "Devil ancestor! Devil ancestor! She is the devil ancestor! God, she is the devil ancestor!" The rest of the people shouted. The white-clothed youth lying on the ground suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes flashed with passion as he looked at the young girl. Chapter 630. Those people didn't care about attacking the young man anymore. They retreated step by step, obviously wanting to escape. The girl in red looked at the young man and smiled. "I've taken care of a few for you. The rest is up to you. Of course, you can let them go as long as you don't have to worry about the consequences." The young man took a deep breath and finally stood up again. "I won't let them go." "Okay, then it's up to you." Her fingers plucked the strings again, and waves of light red waves gushed out. In the blink of an eye, a barrier was set up around them, stopping those who wanted to escape. The girl said happily, "No one is allowed to leave until the winner is decided. Don't worry, no matter who wins or loses this time, I won't interfere. The final winner can stay." Everyone looked at each other. Everyone knew that this time, it was not about winning or losing, but about their lives. Losing meant death. It was yet another battle of life and death. One by one, the young man's men fell to the ground. Flowers of blood burst out one after another. Every flower of blood represented the end of a life. It was cruel but beautiful. After an unknown amount of time, when the dust once again settled, the large field was littered with the corpses of several long snakes. Only 2 people were left standing. One was an old man in green, and the other was the young man in red. The young man in red was indeed an arrow at the end of its flight. Although he was standing, there were deep and shallow wounds all over his body. His body was shaking, as if he would fall down immediately if the wind blew. Ning Xuemon knew that she seemed to have entered an illusion. In this illusion, she could see other people, but they obviously couldn't see her. She could just stand aside and watch. Until now, she couldn't help but admire the young man's stubbornness. He was clearly exhausted to the extreme, and his kung fu was clearly not the strongest among these people, but it was precisely because of this that he was able to kill each and every one of them. Ruthless, cunning, and daring to fight. He had all these factors. He was not tall enough, but the murderous aura he exuded made the old man in front of him tremble. That old man was more cunning. Just now, when everyone went forward to besiege him, he stayed in the outer circle and only attacked the young man when he was cold. Therefore, his stamina consumption was the least, and he was still in peak condition. He circled around the young man, looking for his weakness. The young man's eyes were almost covered with blood, but he didn't dare to blink. He didn't even dare to wipe it with his hands. He was afraid that if he raised his hand, he would give others a chance to deal him a fatal blow. A drop of blood finally rolled down from the tip of his eyebrows and fell into his eyes. The youth couldn't help but blink. The old man took advantage of this opportunity to rush over and slash at the young man's neck. Ding! The sound of a zither suddenly rang out in the air. The old man jumped in fright and quickly turned to look at the young girl who had been watching from the side. But before he could see the girl's face clearly, his arms suddenly flew out. That young man had taken advantage of this moment to make a move. His grasp of the opportunity was extremely precise. If he had acted a second earlier or a second later, he would not have been able to achieve this effect. It was a perfect match for the young girl's zither. Chapter 631. The old man suddenly opened his eyes wide and stared at the young girl unwillingly. You said that you wouldn't help either side. The young girl laughed. Her laughter was as clear as a silver bell. I didn't help. I just played the zither because my hands were itchy. The old man wanted to say something else, but he would never be able to because the young man's sword slashed across and cut off his neck cleanly. All the pursuers were dead. The young man finally breathed a sigh of relief. He raised his head and looked at the young girl in red. Devil ancestor. The young girl in red shook her small feet and tilted her head to look at him. She smiled. Take a guess. The young man was stunned. The young girl laughed again. Her laughter was like a silver bell, and it still had the innocence of a young girl. I've seen a good show today. All right, you can run for your life. Her figure flashed and fluttered like a red cloud. She landed lightly and turned around to leave. The young man immediately took a step forward. I haven't thanked Devil Ancestor for saving my life. The young girl tilted her head and looked at him. I didn't do anything. It's mainly you who saved yourself. She looked at him up and down. I think you're not bad. You're a talent. How about you follow me? The young man was stunned. He didn't expect her to make such a request. WH. What? You can be my subordinate. I can teach you martial arts. The young girl smiled. The young man instinctively wanted to refuse. However, the young girl suddenly waved her sleeve at him. A red light flashed and the young man disappeared. A small white snake covered in bruises appeared on the spot. Although it was a white snake, there was a small bulge on its head. It looked a little funny. The young girl seemed to be stunned. She bent down and picked up the small white snake. She put it in front of her eyes and looked at it carefully. The small white snake seemed to be shy. It curled up its body and hissed. It was flustered and exasperated. It threatened, "Let go of me." It struggled in her small hands, but it couldn't get out of her 5 fingers no matter how hard it struggled. The young girl's small hand poked the small bulge on its head. Your small bulge is so pretty. The small white snake almost wanted to hide its head under its body. Its voice was even more angry. Don't make fun of me. I'm not making fun of you. I've never seen a snake with a bump on its head. The young girl giggled, her laughter even more crisp than a silver bell. But it's really pretty. I like it. The scales on the little snake's body were almost red. It tried its best to return to its human form, but it was obviously unable to do so under the girl's control. If you laugh at me again, I'll kill you too. In its anger, it finally revealed its childish nature and said something that was not very intimidating. The girl obviously did not take its threat to heart. She looked at it carefully for a moment and seemed to have discovered a new continent. She pointed at the upper part of its body and said, you have several small bumps on your body. 1, 2, 3, 6, 6. Including the one on your head, there are 7 in total. The little white snake's entire body started to tremble. These few bags were the things that it wanted to hide the most, but it didn't expect that the girl would count them out one by one. It suddenly said, "You are not the demon ancestor." The demon ancestor should be dignified and powerful, not so mischievous and mischievous. The girl was stunned. She suddenly laughed. You have good eyesight. Let me go as soon as possible. Otherwise, I don't care who you are. I'll take your life. The small white snake was angered by her teasing. Chapter 632. Bullshit. The girl stretched out her beautiful finger and flicked it. I can pinch you to death with a wave of my hand. The white snake was speechless. It was still a child after all, and it was about to faint from anger. Hey, do you want to be my subordinate or not? If you follow me, no one will dare to bully you in the future. Being my subordinate is very good. The girl spoke again and stretched out her hand to pinch the soft bulge on its body as if she had found a happy toy. The white snake had a proud temper, so it simply straightened its body and pretended to be dead, no longer speaking. Are you really not willing? I was the one who saved you. Logically speaking, shouldn't you repay me with your body? The girl pinched the small bulge on its head again. Her last sentence shocked the white snake. It shook its body and moved its head to avoid the girl's mischievous fingers. Didn't you say that you didn't save me? Did I save myself? I don't need to repay you with my body. You have a backbone. The girl laughed again and finally let it go. She threw it to the ground again. I don't like to force people. If you don't want to, then forget it. She turned around and was about to leave. Wait. The young man's voice came from behind. The girl turned around and tilted her head to look at him who had returned to his human form. You regret it? You agree to be my subordinate? The young man took a breath and said seriously, I won't be your subordinate, but I can always be by your side to protect you and not let anyone bully you. The girl snorted disdainfully at his words. Protect me. With your martial arts, you can't even resist 2 of my fingers. I will become stronger. The young man said word by word, I just lack opportunities. I am not worse than anyone else. The girl slowly turned around, and her expression seemed to become serious. You have a backbone. I will wait for the day you become stronger. Her sparkling eyes fell on him. The young man straightened his body and looked at her with the same stubbornness. The girl smiled and tilted her head to look at him. I can take you in. As for whether you can stay by my side, that depends on whether you have the ability to do so in the future. She raised her hand and flicked her finger lightly. There was a faint explosion in the air, and 6 men in black appeared out of thin air. They stood around the young girl and bowed together. Master, what are your orders? The girl glanced back at the youth covered in blood and said indifferently, this person. I'll leave him to you. 10 years later, I will see the results of your training. He turned around and disappeared. The young man stood where he was and looked at the place where she disappeared. His fingers slowly clenched into fists. Ning Xuema also stared blankly at this scene. That young man looked so down and out that she had a faint impulse to comfort him. She took a step forward, and the scene in front of her completely changed. What happened next made Ning Xuema feel like she was watching a fast-paced movie. Scenes after scenes flashed by. And in every scene, the red-clothed girl was wearing a red dress and a hood. She was either playing the zither under the moonlight, dancing under a large tree, or sitting high up in the palace, hugging her knees and looking up at the moon in a daze. This girl's laughter was like a silver bell. She looked very lively and even naive. But it was also filled with a faint sense of loneliness and desolation. It was a kind of loneliness of being high up, with no friends and no confidants. Chapter 633. The lone wolf-like young man in white no longer appeared in the picture, but the point of view seemed to be the young man in white's point of view. He was in a humble dark place, looking up at the bright red, the only bright color in his life. The picture flashed very quickly, as if the years were shuttling back and forth. Winter and summer alternated in the picture. In this scene, Ning Xuemo still couldn't see the young girl's face clearly. She only faintly felt that she was very beautiful. Her face was hidden very deeply in the hood. Occasionally, she would see her black hair covering her forehead. That black hair was like black satin, leaving a deep impression. The young girl seemed to like the color red very much. Every time she appeared, it was a deep red. Her smile and frown seemed to light up the dim background. Whose eyes would it burn? Ning Xuemo was also looking at the young girl. She didn't know what to feel in her heart. It was as if this young girl was her former self. It was so familiar that it made her heart palpitate. Finally, the scene slowed down in the midst of an assassination. The young girl seemed to have a lot of enemies. She was often assassinated. Fortunately, she was highly skilled and had a secret guard by her side to protect her. Basically, every assassination attempt ended in failure. Because of the frequent assassinations and the assassin's skills, the secret guards by her side were replaced very quickly. The old ones fell, and the new ones took their place. Occasionally, the young girl was forced to make a move. Every time she made a move, it was a fatal move. She didn't leave any leeway for her opponents. She basically used the sound of the zither to kill people. Every light red wave was a fatal weapon. Like a harvester, she reaped the lives of those assassins. After every operation, she seemed to be a little dejected and tired. She stared at her hands for a long time, lost in thought. Then she would wash her hands over and over again, as if that could wash away the blood and the unpleasant past. She didn't say a word, but Ning Xuemo understood her thoughts in an instant. She didn't want to kill people. She didn't want to be contaminated with blood. But the situation forced her. If she didn't kill people, they would kill her. Every assassination was a battle of life and death. She was merciful to her enemies, but she was ruthless to herself. It was another full moon night. Another assassination was coming. This time, there were many assassins, and they were all very powerful. The guards around the red-clothed girl fell down one by one. The red-clothed girl stood high up, and the moonlight stretched her lonely shadow very, very long. She finally took out her zither again. Just as she was about to play, the scene below suddenly took a shocking turn. A red shadow and a sharp sword pierced into the group of assassins. Faint golden waves of light flashed among the black assassins. Every wave of light would cause an assassin to fall. Blood splattered everywhere, and miserable cries rang out one after another. The red-clothed girl stopped and tilted her head to look at the scene below. After an hour, the killing finally stopped. All the assassins had fallen, and not a single one was left alive. A handsome man stood in the middle of the field. His red robes were dazzling. The moment Ning Xuemo saw the man's face, her heart raced. Shuilan. This guy was actually Shuilan. Why is this bastard here? Although she knew that the other party couldn't see her, Ning Xuemo still subconsciously hid in the shadows. The red-clothed man was very handsome. After the dust settled, he raised his hand and flicked his robes. Chapter 634. He did not know what material his robe was made of. There was some blood splashed on it, but when he flicked it, it all fell off. The blood flew like rain, but there was not a speck of dust on his body. He smiled at the girl. His smile was alluring. "Are you okay?" The girl did not seem to recognize him. She tilted her head and looked at him. "Who are you?" The red-clothed man's eyes darkened. You don't remember me. The girl looked at him again. After a while, she said, You seem familiar. 10 years ago, I said that I would become stronger. I would stand by your side and protect you. The red-clothed man looked disappointed, but his tone was still calm. His tone was gentle and had a faint scholarly air. The girl paused for a moment. She seemed to finally remember. You are, the little white snake with a bump on its head. You finally remember. The red-clothed man smiled. His smile was like a flower blooming. It was bright and beautiful in the spring. It's me. Can I stand by your side now? The girl tilted her head and looked at him. She also smiled. I didn't misjudge you back then. She seemed to be emotional. After 10 years, you have grown up and become stronger. The red-clothed man did not say anything. He only looked at her as if he was looking at the only salvation in his bleak life. The girl looked at him again. What's your name? The red-clothed man's expression darkened. I don't have a name. My brothers used to call me Old Six. In the Demon Palace's secret guard training ground, they called me Number 6. The girl did not say anything for a moment. She raised her head and looked at the moon in the sky. Then, she looked at him who was standing quietly in the night. She seemed to have thought of something and smiled. The night is waning. Your clothes are red like fire. I will give you a name. How about Shui Lan? The red-clothed man's eyes lit up. Thank you for giving me a name. Then I will be Shui Lan. Is it Shui from Bai Shui? The girl seemed to be stunned. A secret guard appeared in the dark and shouted at the red-clothed man. How dare you? Who do you think you are? How dare you have the same surname as the princess? The red-clothed girl glanced at the secret guard. The secret guard seemed to be shocked. He bowed. I have crossed the line. The girl only replied to him with one word. Get lost. The shadow guard quietly retreated. The girl smiled at the red-clothed man. You were originally a white snake. Snow is also your true color. Let's call you Shui Lan. Thank you, princess. Shui Lan bowed. His every movement was filled with poetic elegance. Then can Shui Lan follow the princess? The young girl stretched and stood up. All right, you can be the leader of the guards by this seat's side. It turned out that the name Shui Lan was given to him by this princess. Ning Xuema looked at the two people standing above her. Suddenly, she felt somewhat perplexed. When did this happen? Why would she see this? Could this be a dream? But why was the main character in her dream someone else? While she was lost in thought, a pair of cold eyes suddenly looked in her direction. Who's there? Ning Xuema subconsciously raised her head. Her eyes met with Shui Lan's eyes. She was shocked. He could see her. How could it be? Wasn't she always a passerby in this scene? A red shadow flashed and a pale golden light shot towards Ning Xuema. Chapter 635. Ning Xuema was shocked. Just as she was about to dodge, a strong gust of wind suddenly rose around her. Fog filled the sky and covered everything. There was a sorrowful atmosphere around her. In the thick fog, there was the sound of a zither. A woman was singing, "The sun rises in the east, my red dress is like fire. The spring flowers are bright, the night is waning. Dancing gracefully, my heart is filled with sorrow. The past is hard to recall, the zither is hard to reconcile." The song was so sorrowful that it almost made people cry. Ning Xuema also felt sad in her heart. Suddenly, her vision blurred. The thick fog disappeared, and so did the beauty in red. At this moment, Ning Xuemo's mind suddenly became hazy. The scenery she saw just now seemed to have disappeared along with the fog. There was nothing left. She looked around blankly and realized that she was in a cave. The cave was not small. The walls of the cave were made of white crystal stones. They were clear and sparkling, shining with a faint white light in the dark night. There was a crystal bed in the cave. Although it was called a crystal bed, it was actually a big bed-shaped white crystal stone. On the crystal bed, a man in red sat quietly. Ning Xuemo suddenly took a step back. Shuilan. This man was none other than Shuilan. If his appearance in her dream was still a little immature, then at this moment, he was the one Ning Xuemo was used to seeing. He seemed to be seriously injured. There were faint bloodstains on the corner of his pale lips. His face was unusually pale. He seemed to be meditating, but also seemed to be in a nightmare. His long eyelashes were drooping, slightly trembling like the wings of a butterfly. Ning Xuemo looked at his tightly knitted eyebrows and trembling lips. She finally came to a conclusion. This bastard was in a nightmare. And his injuries were not light. This was a good opportunity given by God to get rid of him. She subconsciously wanted to shoot some kind of hidden weapon like a poisonous needle. However, when she raised her hands to touch it, her palm passed through her body. It was so light that she did not touch anything. What was going on? She subconsciously looked down and realized that she did not have a body. She was shocked. What was going on? Out of habit, she reached out her hand to touch the crystal beside her, but she couldn't see where her palm was. She was shocked again as a thought flashed through her mind. Could it be that he was still a soul? She also finally vaguely remembered that because she wanted to heal her injuries, she had allowed Yu Tianlan to bring out her soul. She had unintentionally broken that barrier, and then, what was she doing here? What is this place? Was this a dream of her soul, or was it real? Ning Xuemo felt like she was in a mess. She looked at Shui Lan again. His eyelashes were trembling even harder. It seemed like he was about to wake up. She couldn't be here. Right now, she was only a soul body. Even if Shui Lan was heavily injured, she wouldn't be able to do anything to him. If this pervert were to discover her, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to protect her soul. She had to leave. She couldn't stay here any longer. She had to leave. Even if she went to Yi Qinghuan's cave residence, it would be safer than staying here. She had just finished thinking about it when a gust of wind suddenly appeared in the cave. It directly swept her away and disappeared. Momo. Shui Lan, who was sitting there quietly, suddenly called out softly and opened his eyes. The cave had been lonely and cold for 1,000 years. He was the only one in the huge cave. There was no one else. Shui Lan sat there quietly for a moment. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. It was unknown whether it was a bitter smile or something else. Chapter 636. From the moment he opened his eyes in this world, Shui Lan seemed to be alone. He could not remember the past, nor could he plan for the future. Fortunately, he still remembered that he was Shui Lan, and that he had a black wave zither by his side. After he woke up from the crystal coffin, he kept having a recurring dream. In the dream, there were swords and sabers, but when he woke up, he could not remember anything. He could only vaguely remember that song that made him feel sad every time he sang it. In the dream, he had forgotten everything except for the melody and lyrics of the song. He could even remember every word. Later, when he sang it himself, he slightly changed a few words, making him feel that the lyrics finally fit his mood. The past that he could not remember made him crazy. He faintly felt that this dream should be related to the things that happened before he was sealed, but he had forgotten everything as soon as he woke up. Damn it! He cursed under his breath and slowly stood up from the crystal bed. His blood was boiling in his chest, making him almost spit out blood again. He clenched his fist. His eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. He thought that he would not meet any opponents in this world, but he did not expect that there would be Han Shanyue. That bastard's martial arts were obviously higher than his. Previously, he had almost destroyed his zither in the palace, causing him to be injured and have no choice but to hide. He did not think that he would meet him again. Using the forbidden technique continuously had caused him to be heavily injured, and in the carriage he was hit by Han Shanyue's palm, causing him to be even more injured. Han Shanyue had indeed kept his promise and let him go, but he did not know where so many experts had come from to chase after him. No matter where he hid, he would meet people who were searching for him, and all of them were top experts. If he was not heavily injured, these people would not be his opponents, and he would not have to run, he could just kill them. But now, he could only flee like a rat crossing the street. For 3 days, he was exhausted from running for his life. Fortunately, in the end, he sensed that there was a sealed crystal cave several hundred feet above the ground. He used the earth escape technique to escape to this place. This place was extremely hidden. He hid here for a day, and as expected, no one came to find him. He could finally rest in peace for a day. He clenched his fist again, and his martial arts would completely recover. The moment he recovered, he would definitely take revenge on those who had chased after him. He would make those people beg for death. Han Shanyue. Han Shanyue. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. Let's wait and see. He stood there in a daze for a moment. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something and his expression changed slightly. He vaguely felt that there was something more in his dream than before. He tried his best to think. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He finally remembered a scene from his dream. At that time, he seemed to be standing beside someone and then saw that person. Ning Xuemo. Ning Xuemo appeared in his dream. How did she appear in his dream? Was it a coincidence? Or was there some kind of connection? Several questions rolled around in his mind. He subconsciously walked around the cave. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks. He raised his hand and grabbed at the air, then brought it to his nose and sniffed, then, he slowly loosened his grip. Ning Xuemo. He really smelled the scent of Ning Xuemo's soul. She had really been here, and she was even in her soul form. Little Xuemo, did you miss me? Snow was the balcony, jade was the railing, bamboo was the courtyard, and plum blossoms were the gods. Ning Xuemo did not expect that she would come to a mountain in a daze. Among the green mountains and trees, there were vague balconies. All the balconies were snow-white, as if they were made of snow. Chapter 637. All the pavilions were snow-white, as if they were made of snow. The courtyards of the pavilions were planted with clumps of bamboo, making rustling sounds with the breeze. The courtyard Ning Xuemo appeared and had bamboo and plum blossoms. It was obviously not winter, but the plum blossoms were tender and beautiful, and the branches were covered with dark red dots. Ning Xuemo looked at the dark green bamboo on the left and the plum blossoms on the right. The corners of her mouth faintly twitched. She didn't feel the elegance of the gentleman's words, but instead felt a little demonic. Although plum blossoms and bamboo belonged to the 4 gentlemen, they shouldn't be in the same season. This was the first time she saw plum blossoms and bamboo complementing each other. Moreover, her sharp eyes saw a few wild chrysanthemums swaying in the corner of the courtyard. This courtyard had 3 of the 4 gentlemen, and only the orchid was left, speaking of which, whose house had such a tasteful courtyard. How did she come here? Ning Xuemo stood in the courtyard and pondered for a moment. She was wondering if she should go in and take a look. The door of the main hall opened, and two women walked out. The two women were dressed similarly. Both of them wore white dresses with cloud patterns on them. Ning Xuema's heart sank slightly. She was not unfamiliar with this pattern. She had seen it twice in the Heavenly Book Mountains, and both times were unpleasant. Bright Reverence Cult. They were the disciples of Bright Reverence Cult. Ning Xuema's gaze fell on the plaque on the main hall's door. The white cloud pattern wrapped around three large words, Qingwan Hall. Ning Xuema's body couldn't help but retreat a zhang. She couldn't have really broken into the lair of Bright Reverence Cult, right? This was the residence of Bright Reverence Cult's leader, Yi Qingwan. Ning Xuema had heard of this leader for a long time. She was the only female disciple of the ancestor, and was famous for being protective of her disciples. Her disciples could almost do whatever they wanted in this continent. Damn, she was just thinking about it when she was at Shui Lan's place, and that strange wind really brought her here. She and this Bright Reverence religion were obviously not on good terms. She had been schemed against by the disciples of Bright Reverence religion twice and had almost lost her life. Although she had survived in the end, she had unknowingly formed a grudge with this Bright Reverence religion. She and Yi Qingwan could be considered enemies. Yi Qingwan's magic was amazing. She could use magic to disperse people's souls. If she found out that she had broken in by mistake, she would not have a good time. Right now, she was far from being a match for this person. It was better for her to take advantage of the fact that no one noticed and flee far away. Just as she was about to turn around, her body suddenly tightened, as if she was suddenly caught by something. She was shocked. Looking around, she found herself trapped in a pale white net. Master! The two women who had just come out knelt in the direction of the palace door. Ning Xuema also raised her head when she heard the voice. Her heart skipped a beat. A woman in a white robe stood at the entrance of the hall. Her long hair was tied up with a white jade hairpin. She had light red lips and a tall nose. Her facial features were beautiful. Coupled with her white robe, she gave off a kind of otherworldly beauty. This made Ning Xuema instantly think of the ancient tomb sex Xiaolongnu. However, looking at her slanted eyebrows and the corners of her eyes, when she looked at people, she gave off a feeling of power without being angry. She looked somewhat cold. This also made Ning Xuema think of Li Macho, who had killed countless people because of love. She didn't know why, but when Ning Xuema looked at her face, she faintly felt that she was familiar. However, she couldn't remember where she had seen her before. Looking at the woman's appearance, she seemed to be a 22 or 23-year-old girl. However, the cold and solemn temperament around her gave people a feeling of vicissitudes. There was no need to ask, she was Yi Qingwan. Chapter 638. Yi Qingwan raised her white finger slightly, and a pale white light flickered from her fingertips, weaving into a net. In the net was Ning Xuema's soul. Ning Xuema's mind raced. She and Yi Qingwan had never met before, so she shouldn't know her. She opened her eyes wide, looked at Yi Qingwan in horror, and said in a trembling voice, why did you catch me? Please let me go. Yi Qingwan's gaze swept over her. Where did you come from? Her voice was cold and magnetic, very pleasant to the ears. She really didn't know her. Ning Xuema trembled even more fiercely, her face at a loss. I'm called Ah Hua. I'm not a brat. I was sleeping at home, but I don't know how I ended up here. Immortal lady, please spare me. Immortal lady, please spare me. Yi Qingwan's two disciples could obviously see her, and their faces showed joy. They looked at Yi Qingwan and said, Master, perhaps, we don't need to catch other souls. Yi Qingwan nodded slightly. You can leave. Look after shark men, don't let it commit suicide. Yes, Master. Master has told us that Sharkman has to be starved for a few days to make its blood pure. It also needs to be energetic and calm so that its skin will be good. We didn't treat it badly, and we even changed it into a bigger water tank. One of the disciples was eloquent and recited the taboo of raising shark men like it was a book. Yi Qinghuan nodded slightly. It's good that you remember. When it recovers, we can take its skin tomorrow. You won't serve it anymore. Yes, Master. The two women agreed in unison and left together. Teach people. She didn't expect that there was really a shark man in this world. Because Ning Xuemo left the ship early, she didn't know that Yi Feng was that shark man, so this thought only flashed in her mind, and she threw it aside. She was more concerned about why Yi Qinghuan caught her. It seemed that she wanted to catch some soul, and then she came to her door. Why did you catch me? Boo-hoo, I want to go home. Ning Xuemo's body trembled even more violently like an ordinary girl. But in his heart, he was thinking of a way to escape. Even if Yi Qinghuan did not know him, it was definitely not a good thing to fall into her hands. Ning Xuemo tried to use telepathy to contact Kirin, wanting it to report to Rongyue Tianlan. Han Shanyue's whereabouts were unknown. Now, it was estimated that only Rongyue Tianlan had the power to save her from the fire pit. However, she didn't know if it was because she was too far away or if her telepathy had failed. She called out to Kirin in her heart several times, but there was no response. Don't be afraid. Yi Qinghuan retracted her fingers and Ning Xuemo was caught in the net. Yi Qinghuan's voice sounded faintly, I won't take your life. On the contrary, I want you to live well. She turned around and walked into the hole. Ning Xuemo was wrapped in the net, trembling as she followed behind her. Chapter 639. Why don't you enter its body and live in its place? Yi Qinghuan's gaze turned to Ning Xuemo, as if she was gently negotiating with her. I don't want to turn into a cat. Ning Xuemo immediately opened her mouth. She was cursing in her heart. Her transmigration was too much. First, she transmigrated into a little girl's body, and now she actually wanted her to turn into a cat. Yi Qinghuan's expression turned cold. It's your fortune to be able to possess its body. It's not an ordinary cat. I don't want to be an ordinary cat either. I still want to be a human. Ning Xuemo interrupted her. She was calculating in her heart. No matter what, this woman was the ancestor's disciple, and the ancestor was the guardian of this continent. His disciple should also be cultivating the way of immortality. Even if she was bad, she couldn't be that bad. Just like that Abyss Miju in the TV series, no matter how vicious she was still a righteous person. She wouldn't kill the innocent. For example, the several bright reverence religion disciples she had encountered, each and every one of them was filled with righteousness. When they wanted to snatch her things or kill her, they had to find a dignified excuse. If she didn't want to die, Yi Qinghuan might let her go. Fairy, this cat is obviously not an ordinary cat. I think it's better to let a cat possess its body. If we put a human soul in it, I'm afraid it will change its genes. Yi Qinghuan's expression was originally somewhat impatient, but when she heard the last sentence, her eyebrows slightly raised. Genes. It's the characteristics of cats. Humans have human characteristics, and cats have cat characteristics. This can't be confused. Ning Xuemo tried to reason with her. Yi Qinghuan smiled coldly. All living beings in the 6 realms are just mutual transformations. What's the point of talking about human characteristics and cat characteristics? Today, you have to be willing even if you don't want to. She no longer talked nonsense with Ning Xuemo. She stretched out her snow-white hand, and the dying cat fell into her palm. She raised her hand and gently stroked the cat's head. Your mission has come to an end. You can come out now. Her hand turned into a claw, and a faint white light shot into the cat's head. The cat's 4 paws kicked, and it let out a mournful moan before it stopped moving. A wisp of gray mist emerged from the top of the cat's head. It swayed slightly in the air and gradually condensed into the shape of an old woman. Ning Xuema's heart sank. She didn't expect the cat's spirit to be a human soul. This soul looked too old, at least 80 years old. It swayed back and forth, almost unable to stabilize its form. Yi Qinghuan flicked her finger at the pale gray soul. Reincarnate. The pale gray soul let out a muffled cry and dissipated in the air. Yi Qinghuan's gaze turned to Ning Xuema. She whispered, I hope you can hold on a little longer. His wrist buckled downwards. Ning Xuema couldn't help but fall down. Everything in front of her turned black, and the heavy feeling of having her soul enter her body instantly filled all her senses. She jumped up, but after all, she had just used this cat body, so she wasn't used to it. As soon as she jumped up, she fell down. Yi Qinghuan's lips curled up, revealing a rare smile. She raised her hand and gently picked her up. She stroked her fur and murmured, Little White, I knew you wouldn't leave me. You will stay with me forever, until he accepts me again. When she said the last sentence, there was a hint of bitterness in her voice. Ning Xuema's hair almost stood up when she was stroked by her. Chapter 640. The cat's body was like a cage, imprisoning her soul inside. She tried several methods, but none of them worked. Damn it! What a perverted woman. The cat's original soul should have died a long time ago. This woman was only trying her best to keep the cat's body. Who knew how many of its cores had been changed? She didn't want to turn into a cat. She would control this body to commit suicide later. Once the cat died, she would be able to escape. Yi Qinghuan seemed to have sensed her thoughts, or perhaps all the previous spirits of this cat had the same idea. She said coldly, Don't try anything funny. I have set a forbidden spell on this cat. Unless I use a special method to get you out, you won't be able to escape. Once you try to die, your soul will be destroyed. Ning Xuema's body stiffened, and she stared at her with her cat eyes. She started to think about how to deal with this woman. Ning Xuema was the kind of person who wouldn't offend others unless they offended her. If they offended her, she would pay them back 3 times. She didn't have much hostility towards Yi Qinghuan, and she didn't want to deal with her. Now that this woman had offended her, she had to be prepared for her revenge. Yi Qinghuan had a faint floral fragrance on her body, and it didn't smell bad. Ning Xuema knew that it was useless to try anything now, so she lowered her head as if she had accepted her fate. Yi Qinghuan looked at her strangely, as if she didn't expect her to accept her fate so quickly. When other people entered the cat's body, they had to struggle for a few days. They had to go on a hunger strike, bang their heads against the wall, and all kinds of suicidal activities. Of course, she was prepared for all of them. Those people's struggles were useless in her hands. They didn't do anything except suffer more. This time, the spirit she sent to her door was very obedient. Yi Qinghuan was a little happy. She raised her hand and stroked the fur on its back. Good girl. I will bring you around to familiarize you with the environment. After all, you will be living here for more than 10 years. She carried Ning Xuema out. More than 10 years. How could a spirit become so old in more than 10 years? That spirit was definitely not an old person when it was first caught. It was most likely a young girl. It seemed that living in this cat's body made the spirit grow old very quickly. Similar to a cat's lifespan, the Bright Reverence cult's territory was not small, and there were also many disciples. Yi Qinghuan carried it and wandered around. From time to time, they would bump into other disciples. These disciples not only bowed respectfully to Yi Qingwan, but also to the cat in her arms. "Little White, did you see that? As long as you stay here obediently, you will be very happy and very powerful," Yi Qingwan whispered as she stroked the cat's fur. "Damn it, why don't you transform into a cat if you're comfortable? Big sister doesn't care for this kind of bluffing." Ning Xuemo sneered in her heart. She turned her eyes and observed the terrain, preparing for her escape in the future. "Let's go. I'll show you some more good stuff." Yi Qingwan carried it and walked to a wall. Her finger drew on the wall for a moment, as if she had opened some kind of mechanism. The snow-white wall slowly split open and turned into a moon cave door. Walking through the moon cave door, they saw a bamboo forest. There was a winding stone path that led to the depths of the bamboo forest. The road was paved with multicolored stones. Each stone had its own pattern. Yi Qingwan's steps were like moving clouds in flowing water, but Ning Xuemo could see that the stones she stepped on were all traceable. Chapter 641. Ning Xuemo scanned the surroundings again and smiled in her heart. It seemed that there were some good things hidden here. There was a chain of mechanisms. She observed silently. The mechanisms here were quite complicated, one after another. Yi Qingwan walked very carefully, as if she was afraid of taking a wrong step. Ning Xuemo's lips curled up slightly. The mechanisms here might be a life and death situation for others, but for her, who was an expert in mechanisms, it was just child's play. She could break it with a raise of her hand. In the deepest part of the bamboo forest was a large hole. Pushing open the door, Ning Xuemo was slightly stunned. She thought that this would be a treasure trove, and the hall would be filled with dazzling jewels. She did not expect that the hall would be so empty, and there were only a few things inside, and they were all unremarkable. There was a treasure shelf in the hall, and on the shelf, there were not any treasures, but some ordinary things. A brush holder, 2 writing brushes, a jade bowl, an old brocade handkerchief, these were all common things. What was even more strange was that there were 2 praying mats on the shelf. Ning Xuemo stared at the praying mat for a while, and found that it looked familiar. She thought for a while and finally remembered. The shape and color of this praying mat was similar to the praying mat that Han Shanhua had casually created. Her eyes swept around the hall, but she didn't find anything that was truly valuable. The most valuable thing was probably the white jade bowl. The quality of the jade was not bad, and it was thin and sparkling. If it was stolen, it could be sold for a few thousand taels of silver. But a few thousand taels of silver was nothing to Ning Xuemo now, so she was even less interested in these things. What she was interested in was Yi Qingwan. She kept so many ordinary things here as if they were her own treasures. Could it be that these things had some special significance? The whole world knew that she liked her master, and these things, could it be that she had secretly collected the venerable emperor's items? "Little White, be good here and don't move. I know you understand. If you dare to destroy anything inside, I will pull out your soul and let you taste all kinds of torture." Yi Qingwan put the cat in her arms on the ground and coldly threatened. Ning Xuemo stretched herself on the ground and then lay down. Of course, she wouldn't move recklessly at this moment, but it wouldn't be too late to do so in the future. Yi Qingwan naturally didn't know what she was thinking. Seeing that it was really obedient, she was satisfied and nodded slightly to it. "That's a good girl." She turned around and walked to the treasure shelf. She took out a snow-white handkerchief from her bosom and carefully wiped the items placed on the shelf one by one. Every time she wiped an item, she would explain the origins of the item. For example, the brush holder was a birthday gift from her master. As for the 2 brushes, one belonged to her, and the other belonged to her master. that handkerchief was also the one that her master had used to wipe her sweat. That bowl was even more special. It was personally made by her master. Every item seemed to have a sense of warmth when a master and disciple interacted with each other. Ning Xuemo lay there and looked at Yi Qinghuan with a complicated expression. This Yi Qinghuan was really infatuated. She loved her master so much that she went crazy, right? It was simply a kind of bigotry. She didn't know what kind of feelings her master had for Yi Qinghuan at that time. Had he never fallen in love with her? Chapter 642. Or was it because the master had fallen in love with her, but as time passed, his feelings faded? That person didn't seem to care about what others said, so it shouldn't be because gossip was a fearful thing. Ning Xuemo had also read some novels and movies about love between master and disciple in her previous life. It was nothing more than the master being cold and the disciple secretly falling in love with the master. At first, it was all kinds of sweetness, but once it was clear, it was all kinds of hurt. The disciple was hurt again and again, and the master was hurt again and again. Then, for the sake of the world, they continued to hurt each other again and again, until they were hurt so badly that they were hovering between life and death. The best example was the male master and female disciple in Snowflake Sword. It was a combination of all kinds of love stories. The master was noble and cold, and he took in a little girl as his disciple. The disciple was so cute, and she gradually fell in love with the master. She didn't dare to say or let others know, but she secretly collected the master's things and did everything for the master. And the master was all kinds of arrogant, and often, a careless action would hurt the disciple. In fact, the master also fell in love with the female disciple, but because of her identity, he naturally couldn't show it. So, there were all kinds of hidden injuries. In the end, the disciple was forced to become a demon by the master, and a demon would bring disaster to the world. For the sake of the world's peace, the master endured the pain and killed his female disciple. In the end, the female disciple died in his arms. It was the ultimate torture, and it made people cry bitter tears. In the future, many novels about love between master and disciple were created based on this movie, so naturally, there were all kinds of torture. After Ning Xuemo watched a few movies, she began to have a shadow of love between master and disciple, because there was only one word for love between master and disciple: torture. Now, she saw it with her own eyes from Yi Qinghuan. It was strange, when she read novels or movies about love between master and disciple, she sympathized with the female disciple, but for some reason, she didn't sympathize with Yi Qinghuan. If Yi Qinghuan was in love with the master, then this love was meaningless. If she was abandoned by the master, then it was even more meaningless. Why would a scumbag love her? It was hard to find a two-legged toad in this world, but there were plenty of two-legged men. Why did she have to hang herself on a tree? Why did he have to make himself miserable and miserable? Why did he have to do this? Moreover, this woman became a pervert because she liked her master, and Abbess Miju was repulsive. Yi Qinghuan was full of worries and had no one to talk to. The only person she could talk to was this cat. This cat couldn't speak and wouldn't spread her secrets around, but it could understand human language. It was simply the best emotional trash poke. She could tell it what was on her mind. Ning Xuemo naturally understood the role she was playing now. Yi Qinghuan was sometimes sad, sometimes happy, and sometimes sad. That was her own story. When Ning Xuemo listened to this, it was like listening to a lullaby. She felt a little drowsy. Yi Qinghuan felt that her words were full of passion, but in Ning Xuemo's ears, she felt that it was very normal. This was because from the beginning to the end, she didn't hear any truly passionate scenes, such as kissing or going to bed. At most, it was a little ambiguous. However, the most taboo when listening to a story was to listen to only one side of the story, because that side would exaggerate the things that were most beneficial to her. Therefore, the authenticity of some things had to be greatly discounted. However, Dizun actually treated his only female disciple differently, didn't he? Chapter 643. For example, after Yi Qinghuan, he didn't accept any female disciples. For example, this disciple was too arrogant on this continent, but the overlord didn't have the intention to interfere. Ning Xuemo used her claws to draw circles on the ground unconsciously. She secretly rejoiced that she didn't fall in love with the overlord and didn't agree to be his disciple, otherwise, years later, Yi Qinghuan's current appearance would be her role model. However, her character was different from Yi Qinghuan's. Yi Qinghuan was very stubborn in this relationship. But she, Ning Xuemo, would definitely not do that. Even if it was a one-sided love, if one of them chose to let go, she would definitely not pester him. She would let go faster and more decisively than him. Life was so short, and there were so many things to do. Why did she have to let feelings tie her down and make herself like a resentful woman? In fact, there weren't many things in this hall. Yi Qinghuan wiped them one by one, and it only took half an hour to finish. Ning Xuemo listened to her nagging for half an hour, and almost didn't move during the whole process. This made Yi Qinghuan even more satisfied. She picked up the cat again. You're the most obedient. When other souls occupied the cat's body, when she brought it to tell stories, those souls were not obedient. They controlled the cat's body and always wanted to destroy it. Of course, those souls couldn't do anything under her eyes. They just needed to suffer a little more to learn to be obedient, because Ning Xuemo's obedience made Yi Qinghuan very happy. She walked out with the cat in her arms. Good little white, since you're so obedient, I'll take you to see shark men again. If you're more obedient, I'll reward you with some fish when we kill that shark men tomorrow. Shark men. It's good to see it. Ning Xuemo was a little more spirited. The place where Shark Men was imprisoned was not far from the secret hole. After leaving the enchantment, they took a few turns to the left and arrived. It was also in a courtyard, and there was a pond in the courtyard. The pond water was clear and deep, and there was a column in the middle of the pond. A dark blue figure was tied to the pillar. This should be the legendary Shark Men. Ning Xuemo looked at the Shark Men and her eyes widened in surprise. Shark Men. She finally saw the real Shark Men. The Sharkman's upper body was similar to a human's. His head, neck, shoulders, arms, and hands were all human-like. However, his wrists and other joints were covered with sparkling dark blue scales. Its body was slender, and below its chest was a streamlined fish body. Its long hair was spread over its body like seaweed. Half of its body was above the water, and the other half was underwater. From Ning Xuemo's position, she couldn't see its full appearance clearly. Even so, he was still amazed by it. A mermaid. This was a true mermaid. Looking at her slim figure, it was hard to imagine how devastatingly beautiful her face was. She looked at its face again. It lowered its head, and its face was hidden in its long hair. Even close up, it was still hazy. There were two bright reverence religion disciples guarding this place. When they saw Yi Qinghuan arrive, they came over to salute her. They didn't forget to greet Ning Xuemo the cat. Yi Qinghuan's gaze fell on the Sharkman's body. She looked at it from head to toe, and then lightly said, "It still won't say a word." The two bright reverence religion disciples nodded, reporting to Master, "It has never opened its mouth." Is it because shark men can't speak? Chapter 644. Yi Qinghuan didn't say anything else. She walked leisurely around the pool, then suddenly opened her mouth and spat out 3 words, Yan Ziyuan. Shark Men, who had been in meditation with his head lowered, suddenly trembled slightly. He slowly raised his head, and his seaweed-like long hair scattered to the sides like flowing water, revealing a beautiful face. His facial features were deep, His eyes were as blue as the sea, and his gaze was as sharp as a sword. He glanced at Yi Qinghuan. Ning Xuema's heart skipped a beat. Yan Ziyuan was her friend. When she suddenly heard her friend's name come out from Yi Qinghuan's mouth, she was already a little surprised. She didn't understand how her friend was related to this sharkman. Now that she saw the sharkman's true face, her heart sank. This sharkman's face actually faintly resembled Yifeng's. Could it be that the taciturn shadow guard by Yan Ziyuan side, Yifeng, was sharkman? Ning Xuema's cat eyes stared at the sharkman in deep thought. The sharkman seemed to have noticed Ning Xuema's gaze, and actually also looked at her. The cat and shark's gazes met in the air. A glimmer of light flashed through the sharkman's eyes, and then he lowered his eyes and lowered his head. Yi Qinghuan's lips curved slightly, as if she was smiling. You really do have thoughts about that little girl. Do you want to see her? The sharkman's head lowered even more, and he didn't respond. As long as you open your mouth and say a few words, this lord can let you see her. The sharkman still didn't speak, as if he didn't hear her words. Ning Xuema was a little puzzled. Why did Yi Qinghuan have to force the sharkman to speak? Could it be that she had a motive? Yi Qinghuan asked a few more questions, and even threatened the sharkman with Yan Ziyuan's life, wanting to force the sharkman to speak. However, the sharkman seemed to have steeled his heart and didn't respond no matter what. It didn't even have any reaction. Yi Qinghuan's two disciples were finally a little uncertain. Master, perhaps it really can't speak. We haven't heard it speak even once in the past 3 days. The two disciples talked back and forth, and Yi Qinghuan seemed to be a little uncertain. He looked at sharkmen again and said warmly, I've often heard people say that sharkmen are good at singing. If you sing a song for me and sing well, I might let you go back to your hometown. Sharkmen still had no reaction. Yi Qinghuan's face turned cold and she glanced at her disciple. That disciple understood and immediately said, You sharkmen, don't fail to appreciate kindness. Our sect master is merciful and kind. That day in the chaotic river, she saved your life and even spent countless spirit herbs to treat your injuries. Now, she only wants you to sing a song and you still won't do it. Are you sharkmen all so heartless? The other disciple also said, Just sing a song, even if it's just a short part. If it's pleasing to the sect master's ears, she will let you go and let you go back to the mermaid clan, okay? The two disciples were very good with words. They threatened, enticed, moved with emotion, and reasoned with reason. They used all kinds of tricks, but the mermaid turned a deaf ear to them and did not give them any reaction. Ning Xuema also kept looking at that sharkman. Now, she believed that this sharkman was Yifeng. This sharkman's style was the same as Yifeng's. They were tolerant, silent, and had their own opinions. They wouldn't be easily swayed by the words of others. Xuema now vaguely understood Yi Qinghuan's purpose. She was just teasing this sharkman to talk so that it would tell her the location of the sharkman's family so that it would be easier to capture more. Yifeng should be clear about Yi Qinghuan's thoughts, so he had been acting dumb and didn't say a word. Chapter 645. In the end, Yi Qinghuan didn't know its real identity and couldn't do anything to it. Yi Qinghuan stood there for a long time and didn't get what she wanted. Finally, she gave up and said, You're on your own. Then, she picked up the cat and left. Yi Qinghuan took Ning Xuema to a few places to let her familiarize herself with the layout of this place. Seeing that it was very obedient, she was relieved. After returning to her own main hall, she stroked the cat's head and said, I'm going to meditate. You go play by yourself. Remember, don't try to escape. Even if there are 10 of you, you won't be able to escape from my palm. The cat nodded and even used its head to rub against her body, looking very obedient. Yi Qinghuan smiled with satisfaction. It was just an ordinary little soul. In her sect where experts were everywhere, what kind of tricks could it play? She raised her hand and stroked its back fur. Go. Then, she went to meditate. Ning Xuema turned around and ran out. This cat's status in this sect was obviously not low. In the process of Ning Xuema strolling around, she met several groups of disciples. Even if Yi Qinghuan wasn't in front of her, these people still greeted her. Ning Xuema strolled leisurely, as if she was admiring the scenery. The others were obviously used to this cat. As long as it didn't leave the Bright Reverend School's territory, they wouldn't care about it. Ning Xuema strolled to the place where Sharkman was imprisoned. The two disciples were still guarding there. They were bored here all the time. When they saw Ning Xuema arrive, they were happy and called her over to talk to her to relieve their boredom. Ning Xuema was now a cat. She didn't need to talk. She only needed to proudly allow them to stroke her fur, which made them very happy. This cat was born good-looking. With long snow-white fur, when it ran, it looked like a rolling snowball. It was very lively and cute. Most of the girls liked this kind of small animal. Ning Xuema's cute appearance made them even happier, so they let her wander around. Ning Xuema. A deep, magnetic voice sounded in Ning Xuema's heart. Ning Xuema looked at the pool with her cat eyes. Sharkmen in the pool did not react, but Ning Xuema knew clearly that the sound came from Sharkmen. This was not a sound transmission technique, but a sound wave that only animals could hear. Ning Xuema looked at the two Bright Reverence religion disciples and saw that they didn't have any reaction. Yi Feng. Ning Xuema also tried to meow. The meow that came out of her mouth was the standard cat language. It was a very delicate meow. It couldn't be helped. A cat's voice was just like that. She couldn't make human sounds. The Sharkmen in the pool, however, understood. It really is you. Why are you here? Ning Xuema wanted to smile bitterly. Her experience was too bizarre. She was afraid that she couldn't explain it clearly in a few words. She didn't answer Yi Feng's question. She was also very curious about Yi Feng's experience when he fell into Yi Qinghuan's hands. But now was obviously not the time to ask about this. Therefore, she opened her mouth and asked the most important question. Yi Qinghuan wants your skin and flesh. Do you have a way to escape? Yi Feng's tone was slightly sad. She used cold iron chains to lock my shoulder blades. If I can't untie the cold iron chains, I can't escape. Ning Xuema jumped into the pool and stared at the cold iron chains for a moment. Then, she opened her mouth again. What if I have a way to untie your cold iron chains? There are many experts here and the security is tight. Can you escape? Yes. As long as my body is free, I can use the water escape technique in the water. Yi Feng said confidently. Chapter 646. Wherever there is water, it's my escape route. Yi Feng added. So that's how it is. Ning Xuema paused, then, can you take me with you when you escape? I'm a cat now, I can't breathe in the water. Yes. I can hold you and set up a protective bubble. That way, you won't suffocate in the water. You just need to come out of the water every half an hour to replenish your gas. Yi Feng answered straightforwardly. Ning Xuema's eyes lit up. That's great. She could escape with Yi Feng. As long as she had a way to escape, she could go all out. She would make Yi Qinghuan pay the price. With Ning Xuema's current martial arts, she didn't have the ability to beat Yi Qinghuan up. However, she could make that woman's heart ache for once. It would be best if she vomited blood. She seemed to have seen Yi Qinghuan fuming with anger, wishing she was dead. She was like a cat, lying on the edge of the pool, squinting her eyes into a semicircle. She happily reached an agreement with Yi Feng. Then it's a deal. I'll help you get rid of the cold iron chains, and you take me away. Okay. Yi Feng's voice was also a little excited. He was already prepared to die, but now that there was hope in front of him, he still wanted to take a gamble. But the cold iron chains are complicated, and you need a key. The key is with Yi Qinghuan. Yi Feng had also studied the cold iron chains that trapped him in the past few days. He needed a key, and he needed help from outside. He couldn't open it himself. Ning Xuemo said, "Don't worry, I'll take care of the key. Wait for me for a while. I'll be back in a while." She turned and ran. Actually, when Yi Qinghuan carried her here, she had already noticed the cold iron chains, and naturally, she also noticed the key in Yi Qinghuan's sleeve. So when she was rubbing against Yi Qinghuan, she reached out her claws and quietly stole the key, because a cat's body was not easy to carry. Even if she used her claws to carry it, it would be easily discovered. Therefore, as soon as she left Yi Qinghuan's courtyard, she hid the key somewhere. He could just use it now. Yi Feng watched it run away like a wisp of smoke and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Although he only had a short contact with Ning Xuemo, he knew her character very well. He knew that with her ability, she would definitely be able to get the key. This time, he really had hope of escaping. His gaze then turned to the two female disciples. Later, he would have to think of a way to lure the two maids away so that it would be easier for him to carry out his plan. The two female disciples were completely unaware that Ning Xuemo and Yi Feng had already formulated an escape plan at this moment. They were still chatting idly, discussing a piece of gossip they had just heard. Daoyang's governor was overjoyed to hear that his daughter would be getting married in half a month. He had already sent out invitations and invited guests to attend the ceremony. One of the distant relatives of the two disciples was among the invited guests. Girls love to gossip. While they were chatting happily, a voice suddenly sounded behind them. The daughter of Daoyang City Lord. Yan Ziyuan. She's getting married. With who? The voice was low and magnetic, with a slight tremor, but it was very pleasant to the ears. The two disciples suddenly turned their heads and stared at shark men in the pool in disbelief. You can talk. Yi Feng's dark blue eyes seemed to be shining. Answer me, who is she getting married to? Chapter 647. One of the disciples knew the details and subconsciously replied, I heard that it was her zither master, called something Gu Zian. Yi Feng slightly closed his eyes and slowly clenched his fists. Was she going to marry that man? That man was clearly not worthy of her. The two female disciples looked at each other. Shark men finally spoke. Should they quickly report this good news to their master? One of the disciples said, You stay here and watch. She turned around and ran. You stop, I have a message for your master. Yi Feng suddenly spoke again. That disciple, who was about to run, stopped. He turned around and looked at Yi Feng. What message do you have for our master? Actually, master will definitely come later. It's the same if you tell her face to face. Her voice became softer and softer until she didn't know what to say. Yi Feng's pair of eyes stared at the two disciples. The bottom of his eyes was like the azure ocean, slowly stirring up a whirlpool. The two disciples' minds exploded, and the expression they looked at him with turned into a daze. Yi Feng's voice was slow and gentle, Come here, you two come here. The two disciples seemed to be bewitched and they couldn't help but walk forward. They gradually came to the edge of the pool. The pool was very deep. It was more than 10 meters deep. If they fell in, they would lose their lives. Fear appeared on the faces of the two men, but their minds seemed to be controlled. They could only watch helplessly as their feet stepped into the pool, and finally, with a splash, they fell into the pool. When Ning Xuema ran back with the key in one hand, she saw the two disciples struggling in the water. They seemed to want to open their mouths and shout for help, but their minds seemed to be controlled. Their mouths opened and closed, but they couldn't shout. When they saw Ning Xuema coming, their eyes showed a pleading look. They looked very pitiful. Ning Xuema slowed down and looked at Yifeng. Yifeng lowered his eyes and said, "We have to escape. They must die." Ning Xuema naturally understood in her heart that these two people had been guarding this place all along. Once she and Yifeng made any movements, they would not be able to hide it from their eyes and would immediately shout out. It was a life-and-death situation. At this time, there was no room for mercy and kindness. She took a deep breath and didn't look at the two people. Instead, she jumped into the water and swam towards Yifeng. She was good at opening and closing the lock. Although it wasn't that easy to open the lock with the cat claws, she had good control. After a while, the cold iron lock was opened by her. "Thank you." Yifeng's shoulder was bleeding profusely. He raised his hand and pressed 2 fingers on his shoulder to stop the bleeding. At this time, there seemed to be some chaotic movement outside. There were messy footsteps, people shouting, and people screaming. Yifeng's face changed. Could it be that Ning Xuema's theft of the key was exposed so quickly? Ning Xuema seemed to know what he was thinking. She immediately said, "Don't worry. They are going in another direction. No one can care about this place for now." Yifeng was also a clever person. When he saw Ning Xuema's eyes, he knew that she must have done something. He finally breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't dare to be negligent. He hugged the wet cat beside him and made a hand seal. Chapter 648. After a while, there was no sign of the mermaid and the cat in the pool. Only the bodies of the 2 drowned disciples were left floating on the water. Yi Qinghuan didn't meditate for a long time at noon every day. She usually finished it in an hour. Instead of meditating, it was better to say that she just took a nap. During this period, no disciples were allowed to disturb her. It was the same this time. After meditating for an hour, she naturally came back to her senses. She opened the door and walked out. Yi Qinghuan wanted to walk around her own territory and look for her cat. Unexpectedly, as soon as she opened the door, she heard a faint noise outside. She frowned slightly. She imitated the temper of her master, Di Zun, in everything. She liked to be quiet and didn't like noise. Her disciples were also taught by her to pay attention to every action of theirs. They were quiet, calm, and self-controlled. They hated noise the most. Even if the sky fell, they had to deal with it calmly. Her face darkened, and she sent out a voice transmission, "Who is making noise outside?" As soon as she finished speaking, a disciple hurried in. When he entered the door, he even tripped over something and fell to his knees. "Master, something bad happened." Yi Qinghuan's face darkened again. "How did I teach you? You have to be calm and not panic. This is the main principle of our sect. As my direct disciple, how can you be so panicky? Slap yourself 10 times first." The disciple was stunned. He knew that he couldn't go against his master's words, so he could only clench his teeth and slap himself 10 times. In front of his master, he couldn't beat himself. After slapping himself 10 times, his cheeks were red and swollen, and blood was flowing from the corner of his mouth. Yi Qinghuan watched him finish slapping himself, and then asked leisurely, "What's the noise outside?" The disciple calmed down and then reported, "Master, I don't know why a door suddenly cracked open on the south wall of the Lingxiang garden. There were countless bamboos behind the door, and there seemed to be a house deep in the bamboo forest. There was smoke coming out of the house, as if there was a fire. Before he could fully report, his master's figure disappeared in front of him. The disciple was speechless. Since when did master lose his composure? Yi Qinghuan arrived at the Lingxiang garden like a gust of wind. At a glance, she saw that her disciples had surrounded a place with 3 layers inside and 3 layers outside. There was smoke coming from that place, and all kinds of fire-extinguishing spells were flashing there. Yi Qinghuan's vision turned black, her legs went soft, and she staggered. Her secret treasure trove. She rushed over, and before she even reached them, she suddenly waved her sleeves. A hurricane came out of her sleeves, blowing the disciples in front of her off their feet. Naturally, it also blew open a path. Yi Qinghuan almost didn't stop as she rushed straight into the burning courtyard. Master. Grand Master. My lord. Various forms of address rose and fell one after another as everyone knelt on the ground. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. They did not understand why their master, who could be as calm as a mountain even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him, would be so flustered in the face of a small fire. Yi Qinghuan couldn't care less about the disciples who were screaming outside. After she rushed in, she found that there were dozens of her sect's disciples lying dead inside. They all practice water-type spells, so they must have wanted to come in to put out the fire. However, they were shot by the killing array set up on the path, and none of them survived. Yi Qinghuan's hands were shaking.